Hello everyone, a very good morning and welcome to Baiju's Exam Prep. Welcome to our discussion on internal security. So yesterday we had started with this subject and yesterday we completed some very important chapters. We covered few basic introductory concepts. We discussed the linkages between development and extremism, and we also covered Naxalism in India. So today let's start with the next module and let's talk about the threat of terrorism. In this chapter, first, we shall talk about few basic concepts again, because this is a big chapter. To understand the nature of threats faced by India and the world with regard to terrorism, it's important to get the foundation right. So let's cover those few basic concepts and then we will talk about the different types of terrorism that India has suffered from, especially religious fundamentalism and state-sponsored terrorism. So as part of this chapter, we will discuss the Khalistan movement. We will talk about insurgency and terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir. We'll also discuss how India has countered terrorism, what measures have we taken to tackle terrorism, and we'll also look at the global picture on terrorism. So these are the key topics we'll be covering in today's class. So let's begin with a discussion on terrorism in India. See, India happens to be the one of the biggest victims of terrorism in the world. The Indian government keeps reiterating this point at the global platforms, especially at the United Nations. We keep reiterating the fact that India happens to be one of the biggest victims of terrorism. The primary reason why India is so badly affected by terrorism is because of geopolitical factors. The geopolitical factors directly contribute to the increased risk of terrorism against India. To understand this argument, you have to look at the map of the region. You have to see the geography where India is located. India's geographical location and its geopolitical space in South Asia has a lot to do with the impact of terrorism on our country. Now, in this map, you can see that to the west of India and as well as to the east of India, there are two regions which are marked. This is the Golden Crescent region located towards the western borders of India that covers Pakistan, Afghanistan, and parts of Iran. Similarly, to the east of India, there is the Golden Triangle region. This covers Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos, and even other parts of Southeast Asia, stretching all the way till Vietnam. But when we say Golden Triangle, it usually refers to the tri-junction of Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos. Now, what are these regions? Why are we calling them Golden Crescent, Golden Triangle? Why is the word golden being used to refer to these regions? See, this is a reference. This is a reference to the drug production hubs of the world. These are two major drug production hubs of the world. So who gave these names? Who coined these names? These names were given by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States. The CIA of the US, which is the Foreign Intelligence Agency of the US, it also deals with counterterrorism and it deals with various other security challenges. The CIA was studying the connections between organized crime and terrorism, and it was focusing on the drug hubs of the world. So, according to CIA's assessment, there are two major drug production hubs that are present around India. One is the Golden Crescent region, located on our western borders, covering Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. And the other is the Golden Triangle, towards the eastern borders of India, covering Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos. So essentially, the word golden here refers to the drugs, especially opium. These are the major opium producing hubs of the world. So what does this tell you about Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle? It tells us that these regions are hubs of organized crime. Because wherever drug production is rampant, in those areas, in those regions, other criminal activities will also be flourishing. It's not just opium production. There are many other drugs and narcotics and psychotropic substances that are produced here. Even synthetic drugs, apart from opium, hashish, heroin, marijuana, even synthetic drugs, chemical drugs like meth, cocaine. So sorry guys, I think the audio video was lost for a second. I think now it should be fine. Can you just let me know if I'm audible and visible? Please let me know in the comments. Perfect. Yeah. So we were talking about the organized crime hubs that are present around India, Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle. So it's not just opium and other drugs that are produced here, even synthetic drugs like meth, coke, LSD, and all these synthetic drugs are also being produced on a large scale. Because in Afghanistan, especially, there are these drug warlords who control these opium fields. This has been going on from many decades. It's not a new trend. It's going on for many, many decades, where few ethnic warlords in Afghanistan, they control large opium fields. And today they have diversified into other drugs, opiates, and psychotropic substances. This drug production, the whole network of smuggling and trafficking, is supported by even state agencies such as Pakistan's ISI. Pakistan's ISI plays a direct role in the smuggling and trafficking of Afghan drugs. Pakistan works with criminal cartels such as the Dawood Ibrahim gang, the D gang, or the D company, as it's popularly known as. So the Dawood Ibrahim crime syndicate and many others, they are involved in smuggling and trafficking of drugs, and wherever drug trafficking is present, definitely arms trafficking will also be present. So there is a free flow of arms, weapons, and explosives in such a region. Because these criminals, they would have weakened the law and order in the region. When such activities are flourishing, illicit activities are flourishing, it means that there is no stable government. There are no police, law enforcement, intelligence agencies to act against them. So as a result, they'll operate freely. And these criminals will have an incentive to ensure that political instability prevails in such a region. Because if a stable government comes up, they will act against these criminal activities. This is a very lucrative business. Please understand, it's a multi-billion-dollar business, right? There is a massive market around the world for recreational drugs. So these criminals and even the state actors who are backing them, they will never give up this lucrative business, because this is what funds their other criminal and terror activities as well. So they will ensure that the region is always unstable. They will not allow stable governments to form. They will not allow law and order to be stabilized, because that is how they can freely operate, and for that reason, they will use arms and weapons. Constant violence will become a feature of such regions. And as violence flourishes, obviously, political stability will not be present. And this is what, so sorry. So this is what creates a fertile ground for all these illicit criminal activities. So Pakistan has been playing this direct role here, usually via Iranian ports and sometimes via Pakistani ports. The Afghan drugs are smuggled across the Arabian Sea into Indian Ocean, and from here it is taken to many parts of the world. The drugs will reach Africa, West Asia, India as well. A lot of drugs are trafficked within these regions. There is a huge consumption market that exists here. And from here, the drugs are further trafficked into other Western markets, into Europe, into US, and other parts of the world. So as drug trafficking and arms trafficking is widely prevalent here, it is very easy to divert some of the money divert these funds to finance terrorist activities. So wherever these criminal activities flourish, you will notice that in those regions, money laundering will also be rampant. Money laundering channels will be available. For example, Hawala networks. They help in moving the money around in illegal ways. Is that clear? Later, we have a separate chapter on money laundering. Don't worry, there I will explain what is money laundering, what are Hawala networks. Right now, don't ask me that question. Just understand that the illegal money generated through such illegal activities is converted into legal wealth through money laundering. Money laundering is about converting black money into white. And moving money through Hawala networks is one way of carrying out money laundering. We'll study more about this in detail in the next chapter, which comes up later. So this is the intersection of organized crime, money laundering, and terrorist financing. Part of these funds are moved to finance terrorist activities. Because as I told you, there is an incentive to constantly create violence, instability, so that the trade, the business will flourish, which will benefit all these entities who are involved. So there are multiple crime syndicates like the Dawood Ibrahim gang. There is state support coming from Pakistani army and the intelligence agency. There is Taliban in Afghanistan as well. Even though it tries to act against drugs, it says that drugs are haram in Islam, it enforces the Sharia law, but still there are few Taliban warlords who are involved in the drug business. So this creates a lucrative network of extremists, terrorists, criminals, money laundering agents, right? The whole infrastructure is present right next to our border to breed terrorism. Since we share a direct border with this region, whatever happens here will spill over into India. That is why border security is very critical. Border management is very crucial. Pakistan has used Afghan drugs to fuel terrorism in India. Is that clear? In Punjab, you will study later, you'll understand later how Pakistan played a direct role in pumping Afghan drugs into Punjab to trigger the Khalistan movement. It has pushed drugs into Jammu and Kashmir and other parts of India as well. In India itself, there is a huge market for recreational drugs. Of course, it is illegal. It's a social evil as well, because the youth, especially who get addicted to drugs, right? It ruins their lives, their careers. It becomes a social issue. Drug addiction is indeed a big social issue. But at the same time, its connections with crime, terrorism, and covert proxy wars of hostile countries is what creates the concern for India. Now, please understand that terrorists and even insurgents, terror groups and insurgent groups, even they get involved in these illegal activities. Why? Because this will be an easy source of arms and weapons for them. And by smuggling and trafficking drugs, by using their networks, they can raise finances for their terror operations. They get a commission, they get a cut by getting involved in this trade. So it funds their operations, it makes it easier for them to raise arms and weapons, and more importantly, they can use drugs to get the targeted youth addicted to them, and it becomes easier for them to indoctrinate them. It becomes easier to brainwash them and radicalize them. So terror groups and insurgent groups, they rely on drug trade for several reasons. Not just to raise funds and arrange arms and weapons, but also to get the youth addicted. Because drug addicts, they lose their sense of empathy. They lose their social, emotional intelligence. Is that clear? They won't be able to think right. They lose their sense of good and bad. They become like robotic machines. So it's easier for the terror leaders to further brainwash them, radicalize them, and simply turn them into weapons. Many terror and insurgent groups have done this. They have relied on drugs, pushed the cadres, the recruits to get addicted so that they lose their sense of pain, their sense of empathy, their social emotional intelligence. They can't differentiate between what's good and bad. Once this is taken away from the youth, they are just like machines, robotic machines. Right? They can be trained on anything. They can be taught anything. And terrorists rely on this because they can easily brainwash, radicalize them, and use them as weapons in their war. So this is the connection that exists between terrorism, organized crime, and money laundering. And unfortunately for India, we are not surrounded by one such region, but two such regions. The Golden Triangle is a nightmare for India towards the northeast. You know the situation in Myanmar. Myanmar has remained under military rule for decades. And especially in the last 2 years, a new crisis has emerged. Myanmar's military wiped out democracy again and imposed military rule. Since then, a civil war has broken out. The rebel groups and the political opposition are fighting against Myanmar's military, creating complete instability in Myanmar. So, as a result, there is weak law and order, weak law enforcement, and it's a perfect situation for criminals, insurgents, radical elements to flourish and thrive, especially along the borders of Myanmar, Thailand, and Laos. It's a criminal hub. All sorts of criminal activities are present. It's not just drugs and arms and weapons, but even wildlife trafficking. Because I hope you know that in Southeast Asia, China, in Vietnam, there is a huge black market for wildlife products. There's a lot of superstition associated with wildlife commodities. They're also used in traditional Chinese medicine, right? So, in the forests of this region, including in the forests of India, all the precious species which are found, they are hunted and poached, and the wildlife produce is trafficked. It's smuggled illegally into these black markets, from elephant tusks to the horn of the rhinoceros and all other products from tigers, leopards, etc. So this is again a flourishing market. It fetches a lot of money for the poachers and the criminals involved in this illegal smuggling business. Then human trafficking is very rampant. Human trafficking is very rampant, especially women, children, right? They're kidnapped, they're pushed into these trafficking rings and exploited. They're pushed into forced labor. They're forced to work in the drug fields, in these illegal businesses. And the region has even become a hub of cyber crimes, online scams. Understood? Especially near the Myanmar China border, there is a flourishing business that is run by criminal networks that engages in online scams, online gambling frauds, and cyber crimes. In fact, many of the fake WhatsApp calls that you are getting off late, many of the phishing emails, messages that you're getting on your phones, a number of them will be originating from Myanmar, somewhere near the Myanmar China border. There are huge criminal networks involved in this operation, and they traffic innocent people. Even software engineers have been duped in the name of a lucrative IT job. They have been duped and trafficked into this region, then forced to work. They will not allow them to leave. They are forced to work for these cyber criminals and online scams to run these criminal organizations and their activities. So it's become a nightmare for India because in the Northeast, we already have a very unstable situation because of insurgency. Many of these Northeast insurgents cross over the border and easily procure drugs, weapons, funds, and they get support from across the border in Myanmar. So it is this geopolitical position of India which makes us so vulnerable for terrorism. The cross border factors play a major role. The cross border factors, which are not entirely under our control. Is that clear? So let me summarize this. What are these cross border factors which makes India the biggest victim of terrorism? One, there are hubs of organized crime. There are organized criminal hubs present. right next to our borders, that is Golden Crescent and Golden Triangle. There is state support that exists for these criminal activities. In Myanmar as well, the Myanmar military is involved in some of the illegal businesses. Is that clear? There is state support that exists. Next, the border we share with these regions is porous, meaning there are natural gaps in the borders. It is easy to carry out infiltration from the other side into India. So these drugs, weapons, explosives, those funds will cross the borders and land in India as well, including the terrorists and the insurgents. They will also easily cross over. This is what we call as cross-border terrorism. When terrorists and their support is coming from across the border, when they're infiltrating into our country, pushing drugs, weapons, and funds into India to wage a terrorist war against the country, we call that cross-border terrorism, because it's mainly coming from across the border. And we have two such borders, one with Pakistan, one with Myanmar. Is that clear? So this location of India, the geopolitical factors around India, is what makes us so vulnerable with regard to terrorism. Got it? It's a very important concept to understand. Now, one last point I would like to make here. Similarly, there is another major drug production hub in the world. This is the Mexico-Colombia region. The Colombian and Mexican drug cartels. They're extremely infamous because this is another major hub of drug production and drug trafficking. I'm sure many of you would have watched all the popular web series, documentaries related to Mexico and Colombia, be it Narcos, El Chapo, right? They all depict the very realistic criminal activities that exist over here, right? If you haven't seen, if you have time, please do. It gives you a great idea about what is narco terrorism, how drug cartels, criminals manipulate the government systems, weaken law and order, and thus enable criminal activities and extremist activities. In Mexico-Colombia region, including in Central America, you don't have radical terrorism present. But the criminal gangs which are present here, they have deep rivalries with each other. There are different cartels that operate against each other. They even target the governments. They deliberately weaken the governments and the police so that they can easily run their criminal businesses. It's again a multi-billion-dollar industry. Most of the drugs produced here, they reach US, Latin America, and Europe. Is that clear? So these drug cartels engage in large-scale violence as well. They have access to arms, weapons, and explosives. They target the government forces. They fight against other cartels to control their business. And this also leads to destabilization and violence in this region, in this part of North America, Central America, and South America. So this is another hub of narco terrorism. Afghanistan-Pakistan belt is another hub of narco terrorism. Narcotics fueled terrorism, right? The Golden Triangle is another similar hub. And in Myanmar, it's not just drugs, weapons, but there is also wildlife trafficking, human trafficking, cyber crimes, and online scams being committed from here. So these regions represent major threats for any country in the world, especially for a country like India, right? India is a transit point as well for all these drugs, weapons, etc. They move from India to other countries. And India itself is a consumer. There is a huge market for some of these drugs. And this is where the risk arises. As these criminals push drugs into the country, some of it might land in the hands of extremists. Or extremists might be working with these criminal organizations to bring the drugs along with weapons and money into India to fuel their terrorist activities. So that is why law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies, they target criminal activities, especially drug trafficking, because there exists this direct connection with money laundering and terror activities and terrorist financing. Is that clear? So please understand this concept. It's a very basic concept, but once you have this idea, you can easily understand current affairs. Tomorrow, when you read the newspapers, right, you will come across these articles very regularly. You'll better appreciate those connections if you understand this concept. So with this idea, with this basic idea, let's proceed to the next part of the discussion. Today, as part of the discussion on terrorism, we will be talking about Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir. These are the focus areas today. Yesterday, we covered the Naxal corridor. We covered the first conflict zone of India. Now we will take up the second and third conflict zones, Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir. Right? So let's look at a conceptual background. Let's bring some historical perspective here. Let's bring some historical perspective. Let's understand a few more important concepts before we discuss Khalistan movement and terrorism in J&K. Before we discuss the real world implications, let's understand some theory, some concepts as well. Because when you write your mains answers, right, you have to provide some depth in your answer. If you just write about what is happening today and what has happened before, right, that would be very factual. Anybody can write those points. It's very important in UPSC mains to bring some concepts, some theories, some views of thinkers and philosophers into your answers wherever possible. I know this is not part of the syllabus, but I'm giving this additional point here because trust me, points like these can help you in your answer writing. Even if the question doesn't ask directly about this, right, you can introduce that angle. You can get more creative when you write answers, because answer writing, as I told you yesterday, is a creative art. So when you interlink different subjects, bring different theories and concepts and connect them, the evaluators will be really impressed. That is what they're looking for, because that shows your analytical abilities. It shows that you're not simply mugging up some points from a book, from a notes, and dumping it in the answer. It shows that you're reading from multiple sources, understanding all the concepts, and you're able to connect them. You're able to present those points in a logical manner. You have to give this impression to the evaluator. That is when you will stand out from the rest of the crowd, right? Because 13,000 candidates will write mains. Only 1,000 odd candidates, around close to 1,500 to 2,000, will make it to the interview. What sets those candidates apart is their ability to present answers in a better manner. So this is one technique, making those interconnections, drawing from different subjects, right? That is critical. So here, with regard to terrorism, I would like to introduce a concept, a theory proposed by Kautilya. Don't get shocked, don't get surprised. Kautilya, or Chanakya, as we know him popularly, he did talk about security threats in his Arthashastra. Arthashastra is a great treatise, a great Indian epic. If there are any optional students from public administration, political science, I'm sure you will be studying Kautilyan theories in PubAd and in political science as well. His thought, his concepts that he developed in ancient India is relevant even today. That is why we even study Kautilya as part of public administration, as part of political science, sociology. Arthashastra is not just about administration, economics. No, it's not. It's about the whole aspect of governance. In his advice to the Mauryan king, Kautilya not only advised the king on land revenue matters, he also advised the king on dealing with security issues. Arthashastra deals with warfare, statecraft, diplomacy, espionage and spying, and covert wars and covert operations. It also deals with something related to terrorism. Today we have these modern words, but back in that era, Kautilya had spoken about similar threats, security threats to the state, security threats to the kingdom, how a king can deal with them better. So according to Kautilya, there are 4 types of terrorist threats. There are 4 types of security threats: internal, external, externally aided internal, internally aided external. This is how he classified the security threats. Now, this Kautilyan theory, right, it is relevant even today. You can apply this in today's context as well. If you look at his mandala theory, for example, he talks about diplomatic relations in mandala theory, and he developed the Ari-Mitra equation in international relations. Have you heard of a very popular phrase which says that enemy is a friend? Part of it is traced to Kautilya. He said Ari should be a Mitra. Ari is enemy. Mitra is a friend. He advised the king to build friendship with the enemy's enemy. Now, don't you see this in geopolitics even today? Right? Enemy's enemy will always align together. They will form a nexus. They will form a partnership to jointly target their common enemy. Right? So that's why I'm saying Kautilyan theories are relevant. I'm not saying we follow exactly the same, but in an academic way, you can compare the two and you can draw those comparisons and you can apply that in today's context. So just like we apply mandala theory of Kautilya in international relations, in security aspects, we can look at the classification that Kautilya provided. He said there are 4 types of threats to a state: internal, external, externally aided internal, internally aided external. Now, what do you mean by this? Let me explain them. Let us also see if we can compare it with modern times and identify an example, right? Essentially, Kautilya was referring to different types of organizations, radical groups, which could pose a threat to the stability of the kingdom. He said an internal threat is such a radical group, or let's say a terrorist group, which is domestic. It is a homegrown organization, meaning it is based out of our own country. It is based within the country. Is that clear? And it is targeting the state. Such an internal group, a radical terror group, which is domestic to the country, based within our country, and targeting our state, targeting our security forces, our civilians, right? He labeled such a group as a internal threat. Usually these internal groups, they will have some genuine root cause. Kautilya said that internal groups which are fighting the state, which are targeting the state, they might have some genuine grievance. There might be some genuine root cause which has triggered this conflict. So he advised the king to focus on the root cause. If you don't address that root cause, you are never going to defeat these internal groups. Now, imagine how insightful this was in that era. He also said that such an internal group will have limited external support. It will not have much of external connections. Even if they have some external support, it's very limited. So Kautilya said, pay attention to such an internal threat, because this can be the most dangerous threat. Compared to all the other external threats, Kautilya said the enemy within is the most dangerous for the stability of the state, because their fight, their war is rooted in genuine root causes, which gives them a stronger motivation. It means some of your own people have rebelled against the state because of some genuine grievance which has never been addressed. And since it is homegrown, based out of the country, with limited foreign support, it means they are a stronger outfit, and if they become stronger, they could threaten the very stability of the kingdom. So Kautilya advised the king to pay maximum attention to internal threats first. External threats can be tackled. You can always minimize the consequences of external threats, but the enemy within it can be much more dangerous. It can bring down the state itself. Is that clear? Now, based on this explanation that I gave you, can you give me an example in today's context from India's perspective? Can you identify one radical group which can fit the definition of an internal threat for India? Can you give me that example? A domestic group which is homegrown with limited external support, which has some genuine root causes. Can you identify one such radical group? Very good. Aditya, Nikhil, Avani, Vishal, Sutanu, Abhishek, they've all given the right answer. Very good. The correct example here would be Naxals, the CPI Maoist. Right? We studied this just yesterday. The CPI Maoist is the perfect example for this. Some are saying Khalistan. Trust me, Khalistan is not the right example here. Khalistan is not entirely internal. It's not entirely homegrown. And they have a lot of foreign support. And they have no genuine root cause. So Khalistan movement, Khalistani groups don't fit the definition of an internal threat. But Naxals, CPI Maoist, perfectly fits this definition. Now, can you relate this with what Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had said in 2009? Manmohan Singh had called Naxalism, left-wing extremism as our biggest security threat, our biggest internal security threat. Why? Because we had seen a resurgence of Naxalism. The different Maoist groups had united in 2004 to form CPI Maoist, and they were carrying out more attacks against Indian forces. They were again spreading their influence. So accordingly, Manmohan Singh had labeled CPI Maoist outfit as the biggest threat for India at that point. Now things have changed because Naxalism has declined. We have been able to contain the threat. Why did we contain the threat? We understood this yesterday. Not only by the security approach, but by addressing the root causes. In the last 20 years, we have acknowledged the developmental problems, delivered better governance, better administration. That is why Naxalism has declined. Today, Naxalism is not the biggest threat for India. Is that clear? So, if there is a strong internal group which has a significant presence, that will be your biggest threat. And the only way you can deal with it is not just through security operations, but also by addressing the root cause. If there are any grievances, if there is any injustice done, if there is lack of development, if you address that, automatically you can reduce the local support, thus weakening the internal threat. That is exactly what India has done with Naxalism. Right? The last 15 years especially has seen a decline in Naxalism because we are tackling the root causes. We are acknowledging the governance problems and delivering better welfare. Understood? So such a group is an internal threat. Next, purely external threat. It is the opposite of internal, exact opposite. A group, a terrorist group, which is purely external, meaning it is a foreign group. It has no presence or a very limited presence in the country. Is that clear? Such a foreign group, it's fully external, meaning it's based out of some other country. It's operating in some other country. This group has no presence in our country or maybe a very limited presence. It has no local support here in our country or very limited local support. All right. But however, these external groups can also be a threat to us. How? They might threaten our interests abroad. Even in foreign jurisdiction, we have some interests, right? We will have some foreign policy interests. So those interests of our country could be threatened by a foreign terrorist organization. This terrorist group is entirely operating in some other country. They have no presence in India or a very limited presence in India. They have no local support here in India or maybe very limited local support. They don't carry out attacks here in India because without a presence, without local support, they can't carry out attacks in India. All their attacks are happening in foreign countries. All the attacks are happening on foreign soil. But still those attacks which are happening on foreign soil could threaten our interests abroad. Such a group is an external group, purely external threat. Now, can you give me an example in today's context from India's perspective? Can you name a terrorist organization which fits this definition according to India? Himanshu says Lashkar-e-Toiba. No, Lashkar-e-Toiba has a presence in India. Lashkar-e-Toiba carries out major attacks in India. That's not the right answer. Again, many are saying Khalistani outfits. No, again, incorrect. Khalistani groups have a presence in India. They have the ability to carry out attacks in India. So it's not the right answer. Some of them are giving the right answers. Very good. Aditya, Avani, Hema, Pooja, Jia, they've all given the right answer. Let me give you the examples. A group like Islamic State, ISIS, even Al Qaeda, the Taliban, and a faction of Taliban called Haqqani Network. Is that clear? Then this group, which I'm going to mention now, is not exactly recognized as a terrorist group, but it is an extremist organization, and some of its recent activities has posed a threat for us. I'm referring to the Houthis or the Houthis of Yemen. All these are purely external organizations. Is that clear? If you look at ISIS and Al Qaeda, they have tried to have a presence in India. Yes, there have been few modules. We have prevented few attacks of ISIS, Al Qaeda related modules as well, but it is very, very limited. Be it for Islamic State or Al Qaeda, there is no local support in India. It's very, very limited. Very few people have been radicalized by Islamic State and Al Qaeda. They have never been able to carry out a major attack in India. Taliban and Haqqani network as well. I'm referring to Afghan Taliban, right, which has formed the Afghan government today. Afghan Taliban has no presence or influence in India. It has no local support. It has never tried to carry out attacks in India. Haqqani network is a branch of Taliban. It's one of the factions of Afghan Taliban headed by Sirajuddin Haqqani. So it's not based out of India. It doesn't pose a threat within India. But these groups have threatened our interests abroad. Al Qaeda's terror networks, its terror attacks, has been a threat to India. Al Qaeda has connections with other anti-India groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed. Islamic State established a so-called caliphate in Iraq and Syria. Indian nationals were kidnapped by ISIS. Remember the incident where Indian nurses were kidnapped? Its ideology, which was spreading, was attracting Indian youth who were traveling to foreign countries to fight for Islamic State. So all the threats were largely abroad, but they were threatening our interests abroad. Haqqani network in Afghanistan, it operates along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, and it is very, very close to Pakistan's ISI. Pakistan had used Haqqani network to target India in Afghanistan. Before the Taliban took over, we had very good ties with the Afghan government from 2001 to 2021. In those 20 years, we had invested almost $3.5 billion in Afghanistan, increased our diplomatic presence, and we were very, very close to the Afghan government. So Pakistan did not like that. So to target India-Afghan relations and to target the Indian presence in Afghanistan, the ISI used Haqqani network to attack the Indian embassy and Indian consulates in Afghanistan. Our embassy in Kabul was hit by a suicide bomber. Our consulates in Afghanistan were attacked by Haqqani network. Indian diplomats, Indian intelligence and military officers, Indian workers have been killed by Haqqani network in Afghanistan. Is that clear? So Haqqani network was a major threat and remains a threat for India. Taliban, right? Today Taliban might be acting slightly different, but initially when it came to power in 1996, it was a puppet of ISI. It was sheltering anti-India terrorist groups along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. The Taliban regime, which had taken control in Afghanistan, it was giving shelter for Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Khalistani outfits. They were all supported along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, and there was a Taliban angle to it. So these are purely foreign groups based out of another country. They have no or limited support in our country, and they have not been able to carry out attacks in our country. But whatever they do abroad threatens our interests, our national interests. So these are examples of external threats. Now, because of the attacks that the Houthis or Houthis are carrying out in Red Sea and Arabian Sea, we can see the Houthis also as a threat. They are threatening commercial shipping, right? Their attacks which are being carried out against the shipping lanes and against the commercial ships in Red Sea and Arabian Sea threatens our trade, our exports and imports. So this is a direct consequence to India. So these are the groups which fit this definition. The Houthis have no presence in India, no influence at all, right? They don't look to target India as well. But what they are doing abroad affects our interests. So such threats and groups can be classified as purely external threats. Next, the third category, externally aided internal. What do you mean by this? It means that there is direct state support from a foreign hostile government through their intelligence agencies to a terrorist group which has a presence in India, which has a strong support base in India, and also has the ability to carry out attacks in India. So there is a terror group having presence in our country. It has local support within our country. It has the ability to carry out attacks within our country. But however, most of the support it is getting is external. It means there is a terrorist safe haven in a foreign country. There is a sanctuary where these terrorists are hiding. A foreign government, through its intelligence agency, is supporting them, funding them, supplying weapons to them, giving training to them, using them as a proxy in their covert war against India. There is cross-border support. There is cross-border support. Someone outside India is giving shelter to these terrorists. They have a terror sanctuary, a safe haven where they are hiding. They are easily getting funds and weapons from the foreign intelligence agencies. They are tying up with other terror groups, criminal cartels, and they are crossing the border to carry out attacks in our country and going back and hiding in the foreign country. That's what you mean by externally aided internal groups. These groups have a presence here as well. They have some local support. They can get some local influence, and they have carried out major attacks in our country, but with foreign support. So those groups are classified as externally aided internal. Now, can you give me examples? Think and answer. Very good. Nikhil, Himanshu, Abhishek, Ganesh, Dikshit, Prithvi, Hemlata, all of them have given the right answer. Very good. Terror groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, Huji. Correct? All your Khalistani outfits, Babar Khalsa International, Khalistan Commando Force, Khalistan Tiger Force, International Sikh Youth Federation, Sikhs for Justice, all these Khalistani terror groups, they have major foreign support, but they have a presence in India. They do have the ability to carry out attacks in India. Is that clear? All these Pakistani sponsored outfits. Then even your Northeast insurgent groups, several Northeast insurgent outfits, which we have classified as terrorist organizations, like ULFA, NSCN, NDFB, and many others. We will study about these insurgent groups in the next chapter when we take up Northeast insurgency. They all have enjoyed support either in East Pakistan, when East Pakistan existed, or in Bangladesh as well, and in Myanmar. Right? They've got support from China, through Myanmar, through Pakistan, and through Bangladesh. Hostile governments have given backing to several Northeast outfits as well. So all these groups fall under this definition. Then have you heard about Indian Mujahideen? That's another example. It was a homegrown terrorist group comprising of Indians, radicalized Indians, but getting foreign support from Pakistan, right? And they would wage a war against India, carry out attacks in India, but completely with foreign support. So all these terrorist groups, they fit this definition of externally aided internal groups. Their support is mainly foreign, coming from outside of India, but attacks are happening here in India, within our country. So that is the definition of externally aided internal. So this state-sponsored terrorism coming from across the border is a classic example of covert proxy war. It's a covert proxy war being waged by a hostile state against us by using these non-state actors. Can you understand this? This is an example of covert proxy war. There is a hostile state actor supporting non-state actors, using them as proxies in this secret war against India. Understood? I will explain covert proxy war in detail. I'll come to it. That is the next topic for discussion. Now understand, it's just a secret war where proxies are being used, where state actors are using non-state actors to target us. So externally aided internal terrorism is an example of state-sponsored terrorism. There is a cross-border angle involved here where foreign support is coming to these terror groups and they're waging a war against the country. It's an example of covert proxy war where foreign hostile states are using non-state actors to wage their secret war against India. So all these groups fit this definition. And today, in today's context, this is our biggest threat. For India, the biggest threat is not internal today. It's the third category. If Naxalism was stronger, as it was in 1980s, as it was in early 2000, then I would say Naxalism is the biggest threat because, as Kautilya said, enemy within is more dangerous. The internal threat is more dangerous. But today that's not the case because we have weakened Naxalism as we are addressing the root causes with effective security operations. So Naxalism as a threat has gone down. Today, if you ask me, right, if you ask me even in 1990s and even let's say in the last 15 years, what's the biggest threat for India? It is the third category. Externally aided internal groups. Foreign support where it exists for these terror groups, that is the biggest threat for us. So Pakistan-sponsored terrorism remains the biggest threat for India as far as terrorism is concerned. Clear? Coming to the last category, internally aided external. What does it mean? It means that someone in India is supporting a foreign group. A foreign group which only has foreigners, only foreign terrorists are part of it. Attacks are also happening in foreign soil. All the attacks are in another country largely. Its presence is also in a foreign country. All right. But it is getting support from India. Somewhere, someone from India is backing them. There might be shelter provided to them, weapons being supplied to them, funds being supplied to them by someone in India. Right? So that is internally aided external. Someone within India is supporting a foreign terror group, a foreign extremist organization which is operating in a foreign country. The group is entirely made up of foreign extremists. Indians are not part of it. Their attacks are largely happening in foreign soil, but someone in India is supporting them, sponsoring them. They might even have a safe haven in India, hiding in India. They might be getting training, funds, and weapons from India. That is internally aided external. Now, can you give me an example? Can you think of an example for this category? Is there any such group which has been supported? Very good. Aditya, Ganesh have given the right answer. The LTTE is the perfect answer. Rather, the only answer in India's context. This is the only radical group supported by India. Extremist organization. I know some of you are saying Mukti Bahini. Mukti Bahini was not a terrorist group. Please understand, it was a revolutionary organization. It was an armed rebel group fighting for liberation, independence. because Pakistani army had committed a genocide against Bengalis. They had every right to fight back against Pakistani army. So the support we gave, the secret support we gave to Mukti Bahini, was not an act of terrorism. It was a support given to a revolutionary liberation movement. But LTTE was different. The support India gave, India directly backed LTTE. India was directly involved in the creation and in the rise of LTTE. India's RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, was used by the Indian government to fund, train, and even sponsor the LTTE against the Sri Lankan government. I'll not discuss why, that's for international relations. I will cover that under India-Sri Lanka ties. But please understand that LTTE received a lot of support from India in 1980s. As the Sinhala Buddhists were targeting Tamil minorities, the Sri Lankan government was not protecting Tamil minorities. India acted against Sri Lanka and we secretly sponsored a war, a covert war against Sri Lanka. LTTE leaders was largely trained by India. We provided the funds and weapons as well, propped LTTE against Sri Lanka. All the attacks were happening in Sri Lanka. LTTE was made up of Sri Lankan nationals, right? But even this group can become a threat to us. These groups, which we have created, which we have supported, they could come back to bite us. That is what happened with LTTE. LTTE killed hundreds of Indian soldiers when Indian peacekeeping forces were deployed in Sri Lanka. LTTE assassinated a former Indian Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi. So LTTE became a notorious threat for India. This is what happens when you sponsor extremist organizations. Almost every major power has learned this lesson. United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Pakistan, all these countries which have backed terror groups, extremist groups as part of their geopolitics, at some point they lose control over these organizations. Those groups turn against them as well. Now look at Pakistan. Today, Pakistan itself is a big victim of terrorism. There are many terror groups that have turned against Pakistan and they're targeting Pakistani state itself. Look at Al-Qaeda, Islamic State. In many ways, they were created by US and Western countries. If not directly, at least indirectly. Eventually, those groups targeted Western countries itself. So, whenever you get involved in covert proxy wars and use terrorism as a weapon in your geopolitics, quite often you lose control over these groups and these extremist groups become a threat to your own country. It's like a Frankenstein monster that you only created. Tomorrow it will come back to bite you. That is why India has stopped the business of sponsoring any extremist radical organizations. At one point, we were doing it, right? In the 80s and 90s, it was a different era. It was a Cold War period, intense rivalries between countries. To protect our interests, we felt it was the right policy at that point. But in the last few decades, at least as we know in the public domain, right, we haven't sponsored such extremist radical organizations after that. Is that clear? At least not that we know of. Even if we are doing it, we'll never hear about it, at least not for next 20, 30 years. Because these operations, if at all, if they're going on, it would be classified covert operations, right? So based on what's available in the public domain, our understanding is that we have stopped this business of backing extremist groups, using extremism in geopolitics. We have stopped it long ago, at least in 1990s itself. But there was a point where we were involved in such covert wars, where we would use organizations like these to serve our geopolitical interests. But sometimes it backfires, and LTT was a classic example. It was largely supported, sponsored by India, but it turned against India itself, killing hundreds of Indian soldiers. Close to 800, 900 Indian soldiers were killed when Indian peacekeeping forces were deployed in Sri Lanka. Former Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated by the LTT. So it became a notorious threat for India, and we have treated and targeted LTT as a terrorist organization. Is that clear? So this is how you can classify the terror threats, the security threats. And this is all based on what Kautilya told us, what Chanakya wrote about in the Arthashastra. So his thinking, his theory, concept that he developed, we can apply it in today's context. That's the point I was trying to make. So in our mains answer, let's say there is a question on terrorism. Even if the question is dealing with, let's say, Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, you can create a linkage in the introduction or in the body, in one paragraph, you can explain how Kautilya spoke about these threats and how Pakistan sponsored terrorism against India is an example for externally aided internal terrorism. If you write that argument in your answers, the evaluators will definitely be impressed because you're taking a political theory, right, that too from history, and connecting it with current affairs, connecting it with current geopolitics. So that shows your analytical skills. So don't think it was a waste of time or it was out of syllabus. It's not. In UPSC, there is no set syllabus. Whatever you learn, whatever concepts, theories you learn, it will be helpful somewhere. Clear? So now, let's move on to the next topic. I would like to talk about covert proxy war. What is it? Why do countries engage in covert proxy war? That is something you should understand. See, covert means secret. Proxy basically means state actor secretly supporting non-state actor. As simple as that. Now, I'm sure all of you know proxy as well, because in your college, in your schools, someone or the other would have put proxy attendance for your friends, right? The other guy would have bunked the class and you call out the attendance in his name. You're doing it on his behalf. Instead of him, you're calling for the attendance. That is proxy. Same thing happens here. Instead of a hostile country targeting us directly, they are secretly using a non-state actor to target us. That is an example of covert proxy war. Now, Pakistan wants to target India. It wants to destabilize India. It can't do it directly because that could lead to a war-like situation. So instead, Pakistan is secretly using terror groups as proxies to target India. So why? Because Pakistan can't be blamed directly. Even if you get some evidence, you can't directly blame Pakistan as the attacks are coming from a terrorist group, a non-state actor. Covert proxy wars are used by certain countries because it gives them a number of advantages. Let me explain this. See, Pakistan, which had developed deep enmity with India, it fought multiple wars with us. First, it picked up the Kashmir dispute, tried to capture Jammu and Kashmir for itself. Eventually, J&K merged with India. India fought back. The first war between India and Pakistan, the 1947 war. We pushed back the Pakistani troops, took back some occupied areas, brought it under Indian control, and rest of it fell under Pakistani control. Right? So that was first Pakistani attempt to target Indian interests. That led to the 1947 war. It made a second attempt, again on Kashmir in 1965. A second attempt to capture Jammu and Kashmir, but again lost the war. Then 1971. 1971 was a biggest humiliating defeat for Pakistan. Compared to the other two wars, which was restricted only to Kashmir largely, 1971 was a full-blown war, both on Western Front, Eastern Front, and also in the maritime domain. We fought a full-blown conflict with Pakistan and we broke Pakistan into two parts. India split Pakistan into two parts. We liberated Bangladesh. We directly supported the liberation movement. So this was Pakistan's most humiliating, embarrassing moment. Against its arch rival India, it had lost 3 wars consecutively and it lost more than half of the country. More than half of its territory was gone. It became a new country. So Pakistan learned few lessons. In mid-70s, Pakistan had learned few lessons. What were these lessons? The lesson was India is conventionally superior. In a conventional war, India will always remain superior to Pakistan, mainly because of our size, our resources, our large armed forces. In any context, right? The Indian armed forces would be larger in size in terms of manpower. Even in terms of military equipment and military assets, our armed forces have maintained conventional superiority over Pakistani armed forces, be it the Indian Army, Indian Air Force, Indian Navy, right? The number of soldiers they have, the kind of military weapons and assets they have. We have maintained that conventional superiority over Pakistani armed forces. Even Pakistani armed forces are formidable, right? They're very formidable. But compared to Indian forces, we maintain dominance over them. We maintain a conventional superiority. That is why we defeated them consecutively in 3 wars, right? Even in Kargil conflict that happened later, again, Pakistani designs were defeated. India retook all the captured areas and threw out the Pakistani invaders. So every time Pakistan has learned that India can't be defeated in a conventional war. What's the point of going to a conventional war if you're going to lose, right? So Pakistani leaders, they ruled out the viability of a conventional war against India. They said it doesn't serve our purpose. What is Pakistan's purpose? It wants to constantly destabilize India. It wants revenge against India. In 1970s, after losing the 1971 war, after losing East Pakistan, Pakistani leadership had sworn to take revenge against India because this created generational hatred, right? Because India had succeeded in breaking a country into 2 parts. So not just the current generation of 70s, but subsequent generations were impacted. So a commitment was made within the Pakistani leadership to take revenge on India at any cost. Even today, Pakistani leadership is driven by that factor, the revenge factor, revenge for 1971. So Pakistani leaders, they swore to destabilize India. They swore to weaken India. And in one top secret meeting that was held in Rawalpindi in 1974, a call was given by the army generals, the ISI top officers, and the Pakistani leaders to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. To bleed India through 1,000 cuts. This was almost exactly what was stated. Now, how do we know about this? We know about this because there's a very interesting story behind it. India's RAW had a very high value asset in the Pakistani leadership, meaning a top Pakistani official was working for India, was acting as a RAW informant. So he was part of that meeting. He would report back to RAW that the Pakistani leaders have given a call to take revenge on India for 1971, and what they have said is that they will bleed India through 1,000 cuts. This is the English translation of what was said in Urdu. Is that clear? What does this mean? It means Pakistani leadership had realized that in a single war, India can't be defeated. In a conventional war, India can't be defeated. Rather, we will deliver thousands of cuts to India. We will weaken India across the country. We will exploit the social divisions of India. And you can do this only through an unconventional hybrid war. Only by resorting to an unconventional hybrid war can you weaken and destabilize a country over a long period. Because see, conventional wars are extremely expensive. Remember what I told you yesterday? Any war, any conflict is about money. It's about the business part of it. Is that clear? War is about sustainability. Can it be sustained? Is it financially viable? No country can sustain a war for years together, decades together. Correct? Because conventional wars requires money. Massive amounts of money. You need to raise large armed forces, procure heavy weaponry, build naval ships, procure submarines, procure missiles, battle tanks, artillery guns, fighter jets, helicopters, whatnot. Right? So all these military assets can be very expensive and you might lose most of them in a conventional war. So sustaining a conventional war is not really viable in today's modern world. It's very, very difficult. Look at the Russia-Ukraine war. A large, powerful country like Russia has not been able to sustain the war against Ukraine. It is suffering setbacks. It is suffering shortage of weapons, shortage of manpower. The war has hit a stalemate. Why? Because the cost of a conventional war is very high to sustain. Even for a superpower like United States, after draining their wealth, their men and resources for 20 years, even they quit Afghanistan, they quit Iraq. They realized that conventional wars cannot be sustained. The money required is very high. And more importantly, the human cost becomes unsustainable. You can't keep losing thousands of your soldiers. If you do that, your people will start questioning you tomorrow. Just like Americans started questioning the US government. Why are we sending our boys to fight in Afghanistan and Iraq? It became a political issue. Bringing back American troops became a priority for US government. So Pakistan realized this in mid-70s itself after the defeat of 1971. That see, India is a conventionally superior power. They have a stronger armed force with better equipment and larger forces. If we go to war, either we'll get defeated or it will drag on, increasing our cost. The money required will be higher and the human lives lost will be higher. So this will not give us any results. It will not dent India. It will rather dent Pakistan itself. So the Pakistani leadership adopted a new strategy in the mid-70s. This high-level meeting, top secret meeting that was held in Rawalpindi was critical. That is where the top army generals and ISI generals with the civilian leaders who were present in that meeting, they gave a call to bleed India through 1,000 cuts by waging a covert proxy war. Because covert proxy war gives you the advantages which are not available in a conventional war. This is an unconventional hybrid option. Instead of fighting a direct war, the idea is to secretly support non-state actors. Secretly support non-state actors to wage the war. Basically, state agencies like Pakistani Army and the intelligence agency ISI, these state actors will secretly support terrorist groups. They will create terror sanctuaries for them. They will host them in their country, give a safe haven for them, provide funds, weapons, and training as well. Military level training is given to them. And they will carry out the attacks against India. They will weaken, destabilize India by carrying out repeated attacks across the country, which is nothing but bleeding India through 1,000 cuts. Every attack will increase the communal divisions between Hindus and Muslims. Targeted attacks can widen the social divides, exploiting issues like Khalistan issue, Kashmir separatist movement, turning those into communal issues between Hindus and Sikhs, Hindus and Muslims, weakens the Indian society, the Indian social fabric. And that is what will weaken India and destabilize India. So Pakistani leadership realized that this will be more effective in the long run. If we exploit the internal divisions of India, back certain groups, give full support to them, that will take care of weakening and destabilizing India. And best part is, this is a cheaper option. Covert proxy wars are cheap compared to your conventional wars. The money required is less. The human cost of such a war is substantially less because you're not risking the lives of your soldiers. Correct? You're simply putting the lives of few radicalized youth who are picked up from poor families, brainwashed and indoctrinated. right, who have no intention to be involved in this war at all. They are targeted, they are picked up, radicalized, brainwashed, indoctrinated. And these guys are dispensable for them. They don't mind putting their lives at risk. Instead of putting the soldiers' lives at risk, which can become politically controversial, right? They are using radicalized youth who are dispensable for them. They just need few hundred to few thousand terrorists to wage this war instead of lakhs of troops, right? Even the loss of lives will be minimal. There will be no risk to the civilians, right? The soldiers will be safe, but only few youth who are dispensable, whose lives do not matter to them, only they will be deployed. Money required is substantially less. If you need billions of dollars for running a conventional war, you hardly need few $1 billion for a covert secret war, right? So these are the advantages of covert proxy war. That is why many countries, they use state-sponsored terrorism as a geopolitical weapon to achieve their geopolitical interests, to target their rivals. They rely on this option. They back and sponsor non-state actors for this exact reason. And the best part is that since the connections, the links are covert, secret, the connection between the state and the non-state entities are secret and covert, you can't pin the blame on the state. We call this plausible deniability. We call this plausible deniability, meaning even if India gets some evidence to link the terror group and the terror attack with Pakistani state agencies, and even if we point fingers at Pakistan, Pakistan can always conveniently deny giving support to this particular attack. You can give excuse after excuse to avoid the full blame on that country. You can plausibly deny your involvement. I'll give you an example. When the 26/11 attacks happened, the Mumbai attacks, India was 100% certain as soon as the attacks began that this was coming from Pakistan. Why? Because we intercepted the phone calls the terrorists were making to their handlers in Karachi. We had direct access to that. Our intelligence agencies intercepted those calls on the night of 26th November itself. So from the beginning of the attack, we were sure, we were certain that these were Lashkar terrorists. The handlers were sitting in a control room in Karachi, guiding the attackers. We later also collected a lot of evidence to tie the attack with Lashkar-e-Toiba and with Pakistan's ISI and the Pakistani armed forces. We got evidence to show Pakistani Navy was involved in training, in providing sea training to the terrorists because they came through the sea route. We showed evidence of involvement of Pakistani intelligence and army officers in training the terrorists because we caught Ajmal Kasab alive. So we built incredible evidence against Pakistan to directly show that Pakistani state was involved. But do you know what Pakistan did? Initially, when India blamed Pakistan with limited evidence, Pakistan said, we are not involved in this attack. There were reports that in the media that these could be local Indian terrorists. So Pakistan said, these are Indian terrorists carrying out attacks and India is simply blaming Pakistan for everything. Pakistan tried to wash its hands off. It said, we have nothing to do with the attack. We have never done this. We sympathize with India. We condemn the attack. These are the statements given by Pakistan, right? These were excuses basically. Then Ajmal Kasab was caught alive few hours after the attack, thanks to the heroic effort of Mumbai police and one constable, Tukaram Omle. He gave up his life to capture Ajmal Kasab alive, giving India the best evidence possible to link the attack with Lashkar and Pakistan. Later, Ajmal Kasab spilled the beans. In further interrogation, Ajmal Kasab gave up the whole plan. How it was executed, who were involved, what was the details of the operation, everything was available to India. We built a credible dossier against Pakistan to show the world that Pakistani state was involved. Do you know what Pakistan said? That, okay, we accept Ajmal Kasab is a Pakistani national. He has joined a terror group. But ISI did not sponsor the attack. Pakistani government did not order the attack. This is what Pakistan said. This is the excuse they gave. Later, Western countries were helping India as well, especially US and few European countries. We got even more evidence to show Pakistani involvement. We got the identity of few Pakistani officers who were involved in the attack. When we submitted this evidence, Pakistan said, okay, see, there might be some ISI officers who might be working with these terror groups, but there's nothing we can do about it. Pakistani government itself is a victim of terrorism. Yes, there are some terror groups in our country. We are a victim. We are also fighting terrorism. So Pakistan said, help us. We'll also join your effort to fight terrorism. These are the blatant lies that a government can keep saying again and again to deny their involvement. They can always say that, see, government did not order the attack. State actors might be involved. Problem is there are rogue officers. Pakistan said there are rogue officers, some radicalized officers in the ISI and the army. They might have worked with Lashkar. We did not order the attack. So by giving excuses after excuses, you can keep denying your involvement. That is the advantage of a covert proxy war. It gives you the element of plausible deniability. Plausibly, you can deny your involvement. First, you can say that, see, we have nothing to do with the attack. Attackers are not from Pakistan. They are from India. Even if you prove that he's a Pakistani, Pakistan will say, okay, he might be Pakistani national, but we didn't sponsor the attack. Even if we show the state link with the particular attack that happened, Pakistan can say there were rogue officers who were involved. Government was not directly involved. We did not order the attack. So by denying involvement, it limits our option to retaliate. Our option to punish Pakistan for this act gets limited because global support is critical. Let's say India decides to go to war with Pakistan. We decide to punish Pakistan for a major attack against India. We go to war. Without conclusively proving the involvement, right? We will not get full global support. We will not get complete diplomatic support, which is critical in such a context. India will be seen as the aggressor. India will be seen as the country that triggered the war, not Pakistan. That will change the narrative. Why do you think Manmohan Singh government didn't go to war with Pakistan? There was a reason behind it. The reason was we didn't want to turn the narrative in favor of Pakistan, bring sympathy to Pakistan. It was an opportunity for us to put pressure on Pakistan, engage in coercive diplomacy, build evidence, show the world the true colors of Pakistan. This strategy of India actually worked. It led to isolation of Pakistan, and even today Pakistan suffers from that. So it limits our military and strategic and diplomatic options when the sponsoring country keeps denying their involvement. And they can continue with this. They can come up with new strategies to continue using proxy groups to target India. Is that clear? That is why many countries, they prefer covert proxy wars. It's not just Pakistan. There are many others who do it. China, Russia, Iran. They are involved in funding few extremist organizations. US, European countries, UK, France, and others. Then West Asian powers, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Qatar. All these powers are involved in backing some terror group or the other for their geopolitical interests. If Iran, Syria, Lebanon, if they sponsor Hamas, Hezbollah, and Houthis, Israel, US, others are involved in backing other terrorist groups and radical groups. Qatar is involved in backing few radical organizations. UAE, Saudi Arabia are involved in backing few radical organizations. They are all misusing religion. They are misusing these proxies for their geopolitical interests to target their rivals. They all rely on this option, the proxy option, because it's convenient. It's advantageous for them. It serves their geopolitical interests to target their rivals and weaken them because the cost is less, the human cost is less, the money required is less, and the best part, your involvement can be denied. Your connections can be denied. And also intelligence agencies, they work in a secretive manner. That is called tradecraft. They know how to cover their links with the terror groups. Irrespective of what evidence you find, you will never get conclusive evidence to link the attack with the intelligence agency. They know how to cover the track. They know how to erase any links, evidences, and you'll never be able to trace back the attack to a particular intelligence agency with 100% proof. It will not stand in a court of law, right? So that is the advantage of covert proxy wars. That is why many countries use this as an option. Is that clear? So that is why there is always a foreign hand, a foreign involvement when it comes to such acts of terrorism. Now, the last point, after that we can take a break. Terrorism can be used for different purposes. For some, terrorism is a warfare tactic. For some, terrorism is just about religious fundamentalism. For some, terrorism is a geopolitical tool. What do you mean by this? See, terrorism is essentially a mindless act of violence which is carried out with the intention of striking fear. That is the purpose of a terror group. That is the purpose of a terror attack. They try to kill as many people as possible, as many security forces, as many civilians as possible. Because bigger the attack, if the profile of the attack is sophisticated, right, it will instill more fear in the minds of the public. The media will blow the attack out of proportion. Government will overreact. Because that is exactly what the terror groups want. They want a overreaction. Why? Because they are trying to highlight their political agenda. They're trying to highlight their political agenda. Every terrorist group has a political agenda. They're fighting for a certain cause. To bring this cause, to bring this agenda to the forefront, to the focus, into the focus of the world, they strike fear by carrying out a brutal, mindless, unimaginable act of violence. That is why terror attacks are designed in such a way. They're designed in such a way that it will create a horrific situation. You'll be horrified by looking at the incident. It is designed to trigger your emotions. The moment you panic, the moment fear strikes, public will overreact. Public will assume such attacks can happen anywhere. Our lives are under threat. The media will overreact. It will blow it out of proportion. Governments will be forced to overreact because of public pressure, opposition pressure, and media pressure. This is what terrorists want. Why? Because overreaction will put the spotlight on their political agenda. Let me give you an example to justify this argument. What did Hamas do on the 7th of October? What did Hamas do? It carried out an unprecedented infiltration into Israel. Launched a massive, unimaginable strike. Thousands of rockets fired into civilian areas. Hundreds of terrorists targeting civilian neighborhoods, killing people at random, entering houses, neighborhoods, killing women, children, old men, right? They didn't spare anyone. 1,000 plus Israelis were killed. Why do you think they went to this extent? Why do you think Al-Qaeda took the risk of hijacking commercial flights in 2001 on 9/11 and flew them like missiles into important buildings? Why did it target the WTC, the World Trade Center, the Pentagon? What was the necessity to plan such a organized, sophisticated attack? Look at 26/11 attacks. What was the need to send 10 terrorists to the sea route, attack a city like Mumbai, attack targets like five-star hotels and crowded locations? What was the need? Because terrorists carefully plan and design their attacks. The more horrific the attack, the more will be the fear that they are striking. They will create more panic. They'll draw more attention. It will push everyone to overreact. The public, the media, the government, everybody will overreact, pushing their agenda into the spotlight. Now, what is the pressing global debate? What is the pressing global issue being discussed? Palestine. How Israel has violated Palestinian rights. How Israel is violating human rights in Palestine. How it is committing a genocide. Can you see the narrative, how it has changed? That is exactly what Hamas wanted. Hamas is fighting for the liberation of Palestine. See, Israel-Palestine issue is a very complex issue. I'm not getting into the details of that. Yes, Israel snatched away the rights of Palestinians by not allowing Palestine to be formed as a country. Israel never gave an opportunity for Palestine to be formed as a country. It snatched away that right, and it has oppressed Palestinians since then. That is a reality. It is also a reality that Israel also has faced a threat from the Arab states and the Palestinians. There are few Palestinian terror groups like Hamas and others which have carried out frequent attacks against Israel. Many Arab countries have gone to war. They have backed terror groups against Israel. So there are no saints here. There are mistakes committed by every side. Let's not sit in judgment of that. It's not easy to simply say that Hamas was the one which triggered it. Israel is the one which is doing it. There are mistakes committed by both the sides. Now Israel is being pushed to commit graver mistakes, serious mistakes, because Israel overreacted. By targeting Gaza entirely in the name of eliminating Hamas, Israel committed a brutal mistake, a blunder. It failed to draw a lesson from India. I'll draw a comparison here. India is also a victim of terrorism, but we have never overreacted because our leadership has been smart. I'll give you the example of 3 incidents: Mumbai attacks, Uri attacks, Pulwama attacks. We responded in each case. After Mumbai attacks, Manmohan Singh decided will not go to war. He was ridiculed as a weak prime minister, that India is weak, will never punish Pakistan. Because why? People were emotional. People wanted revenge. But emotions don't work in diplomacy. Revenge cannot dictate diplomacy. Shiv Shankar Menon, the then Foreign Secretary and later the National Security Advisor of India, who worked closely with Manmohan Singh, writes in his book, The Choices, he explains the logic behind the Prime Minister's decision to not attack Pakistan. Prime Minister said that, see, we have conventional superiority. Let's say we go to war, we punish Pakistan. What do we get from that? We get emotional satisfaction. That yes, we took revenge. But can you think of the long-term consequences? What will happen? The war might escalate because we are the ones triggering the war. Pakistan might escalate the war. You never know, it might reach the nuclear threshold. Both are nuclear weapon states. And as India is more conventionally superior, we will inflict more damage on Pakistan. If there are a lot of deaths on the Pakistani side, not just their soldiers, but Pakistani civilians die in the war, who will get sympathy? Global sympathy, global narrative will turn towards Pakistan. Pakistan will get all the sympathy, not India. So Manmohan Singh told his advisors that right now sympathy is with us. The world is sympathizing with Indians because of Mumbai attacks. Let's capitalize on this. By taking revenge, we'll get emotional satisfaction, nothing else. We will never break Pakistan's terror network. If we have to do that, let's engage in coercive diplomacy. Let's launch a covert war as well to target their financing routes and the terror groups. Let's fight a secret war while fighting a diplomatic battle. Going into the battlefield will be a mistake. Our economic growth will be derailed. It will be a costly war. Our growth trajectory will be derailed. Our business environment will get affected. Right? Sympathy will turn to Pakistan. The world will sympathize with Pakistan, not with India. A calculated decision was taken. It was a strategic restraint by India. In such a grave provocation in your face, to show restraint, to not take that revenge, to not satisfy your emotions, it takes courage. It's not weakness. So India engaged in coercive diplomacy. We built on the evidence. We got support from US. We pulled US closer to us. We got more support from West Asian countries, European countries. The whole geopolitical environment changed after that. We pressurized Pakistan. We targeted Pakistan at UN, at FATF. We got Pakistan grey listed on the FATF. It hurt Pakistan's economy, and see where Pakistan's economy is right now. We used UN to designate Pakistani terrorists. Tremendous pressure has been exerted, which has forced Pakistan to change its terrorism against India, to change its strategy against India. The same with Uri and Pulwama attacks. The Uri attack was again a grave provocation. It deserved a retaliation because we had shown restraint once. You can't keep showing restraint every time. So the Modi government decided to retaliate, but in a limited manner. We didn't overreact like Israel. India carried out a precision surgical strike. Our target was to send a message to Pakistan and eliminate some of the terrorists who were responsible for the attack. As Indian soldiers were killed in Uri, few weeks later, our special forces infiltrated into POK and wiped out few terror launch pads. But we made it clear to Pakistan that we are not looking to escalate. We are not looking for a war. If you stay silent, we'll also stay silent. We'll not escalate this from here. Our goal was to hit the terror camps. We have done it. We have sent the message. Next time, if you do it, we'll do it again, but we'll not go to war. India's message was clear. We didn't escalate. It was a measured, calculated response from the Modi government. Credit goes to Prime Minister Modi. Pulwama attacks, again a grave provocation. Direct Pakistani involvement in killing 40 CRPF Jawans. And again, India retaliated with airstrikes, Balkot airstrikes. But we didn't escalate after that. We said it's a limited response. Our goal again is to hit the terror camps. There are terrorists hiding in your country. We know where they are. They will launch future attacks like Pulwama. So we are hitting them. We'll target them. But only once. We'll not escalate if you stay silent. Pakistan retaliated just for one day. Pakistani Air Force also intruded into Indian airspace, leading to a small incident. But after that, both sides realized that India is not going to escalate and the war died down. So from the Indian side, the response was measured, calculated, strategic. Our goal has always been the same. Never allow global narrative to sympathize with Pakistan. They don't deserve that sympathy because they are the ones sponsoring terrorism. If we go to a full-fledged war, inflict damage on Pakistan, the narrative will change. The sympathy will shift towards Pakistan. We don't want that to happen. This is where Israel has made a mistake. Israel has lost the narrative. Israel has always used disproportionate force, killed Palestinian civilians in large numbers in the name of fighting terrorism. That approach is wrong. It actually defeats Israel's own interests. Israel was driven by revenge. Of course, it was an emotional trigger. It's understandable. 1,000+ Israelis were killed. But it's not a one-time incident. There is a history of conflict. Both sides have committed atrocities against each other since 70+ years. Right? So Israel's response, if it was measured, if it was calculated, strategic like India, sympathy would have been with Israel even today. But within 2 days, Netanyahu lost the narrative by invading Gaza, by bombing civilian areas, pushing and cornering Palestinians, killing 23,000+ Palestinians in the name of eliminating Hamas. The war has dragged, global sympathy has turned. Except US, no country stands with Israel today. Not even India, not any other country. Everybody has taken their hands off, saying that what you're doing is not right. It's very evident. You can see how countries vote at UN, right? You can see how countries have spoken about the issue. It's very evident that no country approves of Israeli actions in Gaza. You can't justify killing 23,000 civilians in the name of fighting terrorism. Yes, it is a grave threat. Hamas is a group. You need to target them. Fine. But you can't go target civilians for that. Your strategy should have been different. This is what terrorists aim for. They try to change the narrative. Who won this conflict? As of now, it is Hamas. Hamas was ready to make the sacrifices. It doesn't care about Palestinian lives. It doesn't care about the destruction of Gaza. By carrying out a horrific, brutal attack, what did Hamas achieve? It was a warfare tactic for Hamas to bring the Palestinian issue to the forefront, to bring the Palestinian issue to the global spotlight and bring Israel under pressure because Hamas knew Israel is going to overreact. And that is exactly what they wanted. So terrorism in such cases of conflict is a warfare tactic. Hamas used the attack as a warfare tactic. Hezbollah has been doing the same. Hezbollah is a Lebanon-based group. It's based out of Lebanon, just like Hamas is based out of Gaza. Both the groups are sponsored by Iran and Syria, which are rivals of Israel. Iran and Syria are the sponsors of Hamas and Hezbollah. They are using terrorism as a warfare tactic to highlight the Palestinian issue and to fight against Israel. But for some terrorist groups like ISIS, terrorism is a fundamentalist tool. only for their religious fundamentalism. They don't care about geopolitics. It doesn't matter for them. ISIS is a rare exception amongst terror groups. The only goal of ISIS was to create the so-called Islamic Caliphate, liberate areas, occupy territory. It's very rare for a terror group to occupy territory. Terrorist groups usually don't plan to occupy territory. But ISIS was an exception. It was driven only by its fundamentalist ideology, that is Salafism, Wahhabism, which is a radical, misinterpreted version of Sunni Islam, which is the basis for the jihadist ideology. This is a wrong interpretation of Islam. Several West Asian governments, radical groups, terror groups, and even foreign countries like US, which have sponsored terrorism, they have given religion a wrong interpretation. They have twisted the teachings of Islam, deliberately promoted the rise of Salafism, Wahhabism, which is a very rigid strand of Sunni Islam, which is a misinterpreted version of Islam. The goal of a group like ISIS was to capture territory, set up a so-called caliphate, and enforce its rigid Sharia law. ISIS doesn't fight for any country. It's not a proxy of one country. It's not fighting for anyone. It's not involved in geopolitics. Its only goal is to target all the non-believers, all the kafirs, the infidels, as they call them. Right? It could be Christians, it could be people of any other faith, even Muslims who don't abide by their version of misinterpreted religion. Shias and even Sunnis who don't abide by the Salafist, Wahhabist view, even they will be targeted by this terror group. They don't care about anything else. They only care about their fundamentalist ideology, their religious fundamentalist ideology, which is a misinterpreted version of religion. So for groups like ISIS, terrorism is a tool for their religious fundamentalism. For others like Pakistan, Taliban, terrorism is a geopolitical weapon. How Pakistan used Taliban to shelter anti-India terror groups. Back in the 90s, in the late 90s and early 2000, when Taliban ruled Afghanistan for the first time, Taliban was heavily under the control of Pakistan's ISI and the army. So Pakistani state used this influence on Taliban to create a safe haven for anti-India terror groups along the Af-Pak border. By controlling Taliban, Pakistan created a shelter for anti-India terror groups. Khalistani outfits initially, later Kashmir-centric groups like Lashkar, Hizbul Mujahideen, Jaish-e-Mohammed and the others. It created a whole terror infrastructure and used them to target India as a geopolitical weapon. So terrorism can serve different purposes. That was the argument I was trying to make. For some, it is a warfare tactic, like how Hamas has used it as a warfare tactic against Israel, right? Mainly to seek the liberation of Palestine. For some, it's about just religious fundamentalism, like ISIS. For some, it's a geopolitical tool just to target their rivals, their geopolitical rivals, like how Pakistan has used Taliban and others to target India. So terrorism has different faces, it has different objectives, but essentially, it is a mindless act of violence. It is designed to be like that because they want attention. They want to grab your attention and draw focus to their political agenda that they are fighting for. Is that clear? So let's stop the discussion here. We'll take a 15 minutes break. I want you guys to refresh. It's 11:45. Let's come back at 12. All right. After this, we'll talk about something very interesting. I'll explain the differences between terrorism and insurgency and also insurrection, which are different types of extremism. These are different types of extremism. So let's focus on the features of terrorism and compare this with features of insurgency and understand how they are different. And I'll also explain what is insurrection. So let's come back at 12 and continue the discussion. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the discussion. Now, let us see if there are any questions, any doubts. Please let me know. I'll try to answer them. And then we'll take up the next discussion. Gaurav is asking, sir, is India supporting any radical terror organization? No. As I told you, India doesn't support any radical terror outfit anymore. We have done it sometime in the past, but again, you can't mention that in the exams. Please be careful. Whatever we discuss is for a classroom understanding. You can't openly say that it's your opinion that India sponsored LTT. That would be, excuse me. So that would be extremely incorrect and wrong, as India has never acknowledged supporting the LTT. But it's very evident there are enough evidences to indicate that India was backing the LTT. But that is needed for a classroom understanding. But in the exam, you can't directly blame India for backing a extremist organization. That would look extremely incorrect. So please don't do that. But you can present it as someone else's opinion that Sri Lanka blamed India, that India was backing LTT. Then that is Sri Lanka's opinion, not your opinion. So please be careful. Never ever say that India has sponsored any radical extremist group, because that is not our policy, right? It might have happened in the past. It might be happening now as well, but we don't know. These would be covert operations. We don't know officially. It will never be acknowledged. So your stand has to be that India doesn't have a policy of backing any radical extremist organizations. Is that clear? And as far as we know, we haven't done it after 1990s. Ananya is asking LTT full form. Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. Is that clear? Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam. Aditya is asking, is TTP supported by India? Aditya is referring to Pakistan Taliban. Just like there is Afghan Taliban, there is a Pakistani branch of Taliban called TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. This group frequently targets Pakistani state itself. All the recent attacks you have heard about in Pakistan against the Pakistani government and the army, they're all carried out by this group called TTP. So Aditya is asking, is India supporting TTP to attack Pakistan? The answer is no. We don't back TTP or any extremist or terror outfit. Pakistan is alleging, it has alleged that India has supported TTP, but that is incorrect. There is no evidence to show that, and India has firmly denied any such allegations. Next, Aditya is also asking, sir, will you cover Israel-Palestine background in your IR classes? Of course, yes. We will study West Asia in international relations. There I will cover Israel-Palestine issue in full detail, complete detail. It's not needed here. Here we just had to talk about Hamas and the recent attack, how it has influenced Israel's policies. That is relevant for us because we are talking about terrorism and counter-terrorism. But Israel-Palestine issue, I'll discuss that under IR, under international relations. Abhishek is asking, are there any international conventions to combat terrorism? I'll come to it, don't worry. At the end of the chapter today, we will discuss the global measures to fight terrorism. So there we will see whether there is a global convention or not to fight terrorism. Student called Gib is asking, as you mentioned, in India they were supporting rebel groups. How can't Hamas be a rebel group rather than terrorist group? As we know, Israel is in illegal occupation of Palestine. See, this is again about perspective. That is the exact point I'm coming to next. Because see, terrorism has no universal definition. Many countries, they don't look at Hamas as a terrorist group. Even India has never officially declared Hamas as a terrorist organization. Even though we condemned the 7th attack, the attack that happened on 7th October, and we supported Israel against terrorism, we have never designated Hamas as a terrorist outfit. Many countries don't look at Hamas as a terror group. They look at Hamas as a rebel movement or a revolutionary liberation movement, which is fighting for the independence of Palestine. So this is about perspective. There is a very popular phrase, I'm sure you would have heard about it. One man's revolutionary is another man's terrorist. Do you understand the statement? For one, a revolutionary, right, who's a revolutionary, for someone else, he could be a terrorist. Take the example of Bhagat Singh. For us Indians, Bhagat Singh was a revolutionary freedom fighter. He used limited, calculated violence to send the message across to the British to fight the colonial exploitation. But the British treated him as a terrorist. They saw him as a terrorist. So one man's revolutionary is another man's terrorist. So the way the world looks at terrorism is very subjective. It depends on the context, the time, the situation. There is no universal definition for terrorism. US might call one group as a terror group. India might have a different view. Other countries might have a different view. Many countries might treat one group as a terrorist group, but others who might be sponsoring them, who might be benefiting from that group, they will never call the group a terrorist group. This is where the difference comes up. So you're asking about Hamas. As I told you, many countries look at Hamas as a liberation movement. India itself has not officially labeled Hamas as a terror group, but US, Israel, European countries, which are all Israeli allies, they have designated Hamas as a terrorist group. Is that clear? We'll explore more about this topic. That is the next discussion, by the way. We will talk more about this. Don't worry. Alfia has a similar question. Hamas is a legitimate government of Gaza, recognized, but their militia is considered as a rebel group. That's exactly what I was telling you. Hamas was acting as the administrative authority as well for Gaza. Even now, Hamas is the administrative authority of Gaza, right? So it depends on how you look at it. It depends on your perspective. But in our case, as UPSC aspirants, we will go by what the government of India is telling us. If the Indian government has designated any group as a terror group under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, we will call those groups as terrorist groups. Is that clear? So with regard to Hamas, be a little careful. Better word to use for Hamas is it's an extremist organization. No one can deny that Hamas is not an extremist organization. Since India has not labeled Hamas as a terror group, try and avoid doing that in your answers as well when it is required. All right, India officially has not listed Hamas under UAPA. Got it? So you can call Hamas an extremist group, but don't go to the extent of calling it a terrorist organization. Whereas others are calling it a terror group, many others don't look at Hamas as a terror group, right? So that is the difference you should understand. Jia is asking, sir, we say that Pakistan started covert war policy in 1970s, but when in 1947, it was sponsoring tribal groups in Kashmir. Does that also count as terrorism? No, it was slightly different. See, in 1947, when Pakistan made an illegal attempt to capture Jammu and Kashmir, it sponsored a tribal invasion. It sponsored few tribal militias. The Pakistani army backed a tribal militia to invade Jammu and Kashmir and to snatch it from Raja Hari Singh. That was an illegal occupation attempt. It was not exactly an act of terrorism. Pakistan's covert war of sponsoring terrorism against India actually started in 1960s. It's in the northeast of India where Pakistan first sponsored a terror group against India. We'll discuss that under Northeast insurgency. Don't jump ahead. I'll discuss everything. Don't worry. In Northeast India, there was one group which was sponsored by Pakistan in 1960s itself. Then in 1970s is when Pakistan officially adopted the policy of a covert war against India. It launched a major proxy war against India using terror groups to target India. So what happened in 1947 was different. It was an attempt to illegally occupy Jammu and Kashmir by sponsoring a tribal invasion. Is that clear? The circumstances were different. So that was not exactly an act of terrorism. It was an illegal occupation attempt to threaten the sovereignty of J&K. Right? But Pakistan's covert war of waging a terrorist war against India initially started in 1960s, but really took off in 1970s. Ghulam Mustafa is asking, sir, is Hamas fighting for a genuine cause? The cause might be genuine, but the methods employed is questionable. See, Palestinians deserve to have their country. Yes, that is what was promised under the two-state solution. Israel never allowed that to happen. Israel unilaterally declared independence, broke the two-state solution, captured most of Palestine, and blocked out most of Palestine. Right? But that does not mean that you resort to terrorism, brutal acts of terrorism to liberate Palestine. So methods Hamas has employed is highly questionable, even though it might be fighting for the right cause, right? You can't justify mindless violence, killing of innocent civilians in any context. Whoever is doing it, for whatever purpose, for whatever genuine cause, violence cannot be justified. Gaurav is asking, sir, does India secretly support Baloch militants? Officially, no. We may have contacts with Baloch nationalists, Sindh nationalists in Pakistan, but there is no evidence to show that we are sponsoring and supporting them. And officially, of course, there is no such policy and we deny any such allegations. So be careful here in your answers. Never say that India sponsors rebels in Pakistan, that we sponsor TTP or Baloch rebels. We have sponsored LTTE. Never ever say that in your answers. That can't come as your opinion because these are all allegations, never acknowledged, confirmed by the government. Discussing in a class is different, but you can't write that in your answers. Aditya is asking, is the same logic applied for Taliban as well? Yes. Some treat Taliban as a terror group, but many countries don't look at Taliban as a terrorist group. If you ask me academically, from a professional point of view, Taliban is a political radical organization. Same with Hezbollah in Lebanon. These are political radical organizations. They have political aims, right? Next, when I discuss terrorism versus insurgency, you will understand more about this. Taliban was mainly seen as a political radical group engaged in insurgency in Afghanistan. But some countries who are affected by Taliban's extremism, they labeled Taliban as a terror group. Like India, for example, we saw Taliban as a terror group initially because it was helping Pakistan to breed anti-India terror groups. But others like US, Russia, China, European countries, Iran, they have never seen Taliban as a terror group. They have just seen Taliban as a radical political organization involved in violent insurgency. Okay, last question. Nikhil says it was the Arab nations that first attacked Israel in 1948 and broke the two-state solution by occupying parts of Palestine and never gave them freedom. No, Nikhil, you're wrong. You're completely wrong here. It was Israel which broke the two-state solution. It unilaterally declared independence. It didn't allow Palestine to be formed as a country. That is when the Arab states attacked Israel to protect Palestine. Is that clear? It's not the other way around. Okay, so guys, these were the questions, but most of the questions I understand why they have come. Most of you are asking how to define a terror group, how to identify a terror group, right? Whether Taliban is a terror group or an insurgent group. It's all on these lines, whether Hamas is a terror group or not, correct? Now I will clarify this. Stay with me for the next 45 to 50 minutes. We will have the same discussion. That is my next topic. We are going to study what exactly is terrorism. How is it different from insurgency? Yesterday, I told you that these are different types of extremism. Remember, I told you extremism has a wide range within it. It can be something as simple as believing in a radical ideology, advocating, propagating a radical ideology, or extending support, direct or indirect support to acts of violence. But the final stage of extremism is to get involved in those violent acts, which could be insurgency, insurrection, or terrorism. These are the different types of extremism, the last stages of extremism. But all the three are different. Terrorism is the worst form of extremism, even compared to insurgency, or also called militancy sometimes. Insurgency, militancy is roughly the same. All right, you would have seen these different terms being used in the media, in newspapers, in government statements as well. term insurgency, militancy is very close to each other. These acts of extremism are different from acts of terrorism. Terrorism is considered as the most brutal, worst form of extremism compared to any other form of extremism. Is that clear? That is why governments are very careful about calling a group a terrorist group. Media organizations are very careful about calling a group as a terrorist group. Is that clear? Now you look at Western media. They never call Pakistan-backed groups against India as terror groups. They call them militants. They call them armed groups, rebel groups. Why? Because they don't see this exactly as terrorism. Governments as well are very careful. As you pointed out, some call Hamas a terror group, some don't call Hamas a terror group. Why? Why is this difference? That's because terrorism is considered as the most brutal form of extremism. And there is no universally accepted definition for terrorism. There is no universally accepted definition for terrorism. The world is divided. Definition of terrorism has become subjective. It is dependent on geopolitics. It is dependent on the government, the context, the circumstances. So even if some countries look at a group as a terrorist group, others may not consider it as a terrorist group. As I told you, one man's terrorist is another man's revolutionary. It's all about perspective. Some countries which benefit from these terror groups, they treat them as good terrorists. They differentiate between terrorism. These are the state sponsors of terrorism. Those who are involved in sponsoring terrorism, they differentiate between terrorists. They treat some terror groups as good terror groups because they are serving their agenda. They are sponsoring them. They are using them for their geopolitics. They only target those groups which are a threat to them. They treat them as the bad terrorists. There is a distinction that happens in geopolitics. Some countries distinguish between terror groups and they call them good terrorists and bad terrorists. If not officially, that's exactly what they're doing. Like Pakistan will target TTP. Pakistan will target Baloch armed groups. Pakistan will target the Sindhi nationalist outfits. Why? Because they are targeting Pakistan itself. They are threatening Pakistani state, attacking Pakistani state. So Pakistan calls all of them as terrorist organizations. But it will never target Lashkar-e-Toiba. It will not target Al-Qaeda. It will not target Jaish-e-Mohammed. Why? Because they're serving Pakistani interests. They're helping Pakistan to target India and destabilize India, which is the geopolitical goal of Pakistan. So Pakistan looks at them as good terrorists and gives them all the support, all the shelter needed. It only targets the Baloch groups, the Sindhi outfits, and the TTP. Can you see the distinction? Same with many other countries. Even US, European countries, Russia, they have all done this. They have sponsored few terror groups, worked with them, given full support to them through their intelligence agencies because they were serving their agenda. They only target those groups which are a threat to them, which can attack them. So that is why India has been urging in the last 20, 30 years to stop this distinction between so-called good and bad terrorism. After we stopped getting involved with extremist groups in 1990s, after we became the biggest victim of state-sponsored terrorism, we have been urging the global community, especially the United Nations, to stop this distinction because all forms of terrorism is equally bad. Any terror presence is dangerous for the whole world. This is India's official point. This is our diplomatic stand. When we talk to other countries, when we work with UN, when we address UN Assembly meetings, Indian leaders, Indian diplomats, they keep stressing this point. We have done this in the last 25, 30 years consistently. We have urged everyone to stop the distinction between good and bad terrorists. We have urged the world to develop a universal definition of terrorism and to target all forms of terrorism. Because one form of terrorism will always enable another form of terrorism. You might be supporting some so-called good terrorists today because they're serving your interests, but tomorrow they themselves might turn against you, or tomorrow they might work with other terror groups which are a threat to you. So terrorism is a threat to humanity itself. It's a global threat to humanity. This is the position India is pushing for. Is that clear? India does not distinguish between terror groups and radical extremist organizations. That's why I told you we have stopped backing any radical extremist group. That is not our policy anymore. We don't do that distinction anymore. But some countries have continued it. So we urge the world even today to target all forms of terrorism. We urge the global community to stop distinguishing the so-called good and bad terrorists. Is that clear? Now, let us see how we can identify a terrorist group. This is an academic discussion. I'm moving away from geopolitics. Leave the geopolitics, leave the subjective part. Academically, as an internal security student, how can we distinguish a terrorist organization from an insurgent group? That is what we will study right now. Terrorism does not attempt to directly challenge the government forces. This is a feature of terrorism. By looking at the way a group operates, the way they are structured, what is their goal, what are they targeting, right? What is their agenda? When you analyze those aspects, you can realize whether a group is an insurgent group or a terrorist group. Yesterday, I told you that Naxals, academically, they are insurgents, not terrorists. But Government of India has the discretion to label insurgents as terrorists. Government of India has designated CPI Maoist as a terror group under UAPA. But technically speaking, Naxals are insurgents, not exactly terrorists. Now you'll understand the difference. Just give me another 20-30 minutes. I will explain those differences. The Northeast rebel groups, ULFA, NSCN, NDFB, and many others, they are all insurgent outfits. Academically, they're all insurgent groups. But Government of India has the right, it has a subjective right to label any threat as a terrorist threat. If a group is engaged in large-scale violence, killing our forces, our civilians, threatening our integrity and sovereignty, Indian government has the right to define even an insurgent group as a terrorist group. Can you get this? Can you understand this concept? So now, let us look at the academic distinction between terrorism and insurgency. A terrorist group usually does not challenge the government forces directly. Now, what do you mean by this? To understand this, you have to compare it with insurgency. Only then you will understand. Yesterday, when talking about Naxals, what did I tell you? When we discussed Maoist doctrine, the principles of Mao Zedong, what did we understand? We understood that Naxals are looking to overthrow the state. Didn't I tell you this? Maoists are looking to capture state power. Taliban in Afghanistan. I just told you, academically, Taliban is actually an insurgent group, a radical political insurgent outfit. What did Taliban want? Taliban wanted to capture state power. It wanted to throw the Afghan government, throw the foreign troops out, and capture the authority, capture the state. This is a feature of insurgent groups. They directly challenge the government. Naxals in India, they have directly challenged the Indian government. That is why they target the Indian security forces openly, directly. That is their stated political objective. But a terrorist group will not do this. Have you ever heard of Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed saying that they want to throw the Indian state out? No. Their goal is to liberate Kashmir from India. Both are different. They want to separate Kashmir from India. That is their goal. They don't want to replace the Indian government. They don't want to remove the Indian government and take over the government here. That is not their goal. Usually, terrorist groups, purely terrorist organizations, will not have that objective. They will not directly challenge the government and its forces and its authority. They will attack the forces. That is different. Like Lashkar will attack Indian army in Kashmir. Why? They are trying to liberate Kashmir from India. That is their goal. They're not saying we'll liberate Kashmir and we'll form the future government, that Lashkar will become the future Kashmir government. They're not saying that they'll throw the Indian government out and capture power in Delhi. They're not saying that. Naxals are saying that. Taliban said, we will capture power in Kabul, we'll throw out the Afghan government. That is a direct challenge to the government, which is done by insurgents. I'll give you more examples so that it becomes clear and simple for you. Take ULFA, NSCN, and all the other Northeast insurgent groups. They were all separatist groups essentially. They wanted to break those regions away from India and make them independent countries, and they wanted to form the future government. ULFA wanted to form the government for Assam. NSCN wanted to form the government for Naga areas, the Greater Nagaland, the so-called Greater Nagaland. NDFB wanted to liberate Bodo areas from India and form the future Bodo government. So they had a clear political objective to capture state power. So they directly challenge the government forces directly. Those are insurgent groups. A pure terrorist group usually will not do that. Understand? Please make a note of this point. Next, terrorists, as I explained earlier, they plan to commit mindless and horrific acts of violence. This is another feature of terrorism. They want to carry out mindless violence, horrific acts of violence. This is deliberate. Why? Because terrorists want attention. Remember, I told you that a terror attack is designed to instill fear. A terror attack is designed to stoke your emotions. A terror attack is designed to push everyone to overreact. That is why they put a lot of effort into choosing their targets. They always go for a high-profile target. They always aim for such attacks which will give them maximum publicity. Understood? This you don't find in insurgents. Insurgents don't go after high-value, high-profile targets. They are not looking to draw maximum attention. Right? They have a different agenda, which I'll explain. Now, before that, let me give you an example. I'll give you a case. You tell me, you give me the answer. Let's say Lashkar-e-Toiba carries out a bomb blast tomorrow in Mumbai. Hypothetically. Let's say Lashkar-e-Toiba carries out a bomb attack in Mumbai, but it's a failed attack. The bomb doesn't really go off. There's a small explosion. One person is killed. This happens in a high-profile location. Maybe at an airport, railway station, shopping mall, at a crowded place or a five-star hotel, for example. This is one incident. On the same day, on the very same day, let us say Naxals attack a CRPF convoy in the forests of Chhattisgarh. In Dantewad, in a remote jungle, Naxals attack a convoy of CRPF and 4 CRPF Jawans are killed. These are the two incidents which has happened on the same day. Now you tell me, which incident will grab the headlines? Tomorrow when you open the newspaper or when you switch on the TV news channels, which incident will be right in your face? Which incident grabs your attention? To which incident will the media pay more attention? Can you tell me? Very good. Obviously the first one. All of you are getting it right. The small attack in Mumbai, which was actually a failed attack, only one person died, will grab global headlines. Even New York Times will put it on the front page that terror attack in Mumbai, one person dead. Nobody will report the Naxal ambush where 4 Jawans were killed in a remote forest. Can you see the difference? This is not some coincidence. This is the plan. Terrorists go for high profile targets. Lashkar will not get anything if they carry out an attack in some remote forest in some jungle. Nobody will care about that. Even a small incident in Delhi, Mumbai, New York, London against important installations, strategic buildings, important government buildings, right? 5-star hotels, foreign tourists, these are high profile targets. That will grab media's attention, right? In the Northeast, there are so many attacks that have happened. How many do you remember? I'm sure all of you remember Parliament attacks, Mumbai attacks, 9/11 attacks. Why? That grabbed your attention. That grabbed the media's attention. Everybody overreacted. Those are terrorist incidents. The ones you don't remember, Naxal attacks, Northeast attacks carried out by insurgents, those are insurgent attacks carried out by insurgent groups. Insurgents don't really go behind high profile targets. That is why I told you yesterday as well. Naxals have never carried out attacks in our cities. Even in Central Eastern India, there are so many cities. There is Bhubaneswar, Cuttack, there is Ranchi, right? There is a Kolkata nearby. Why haven't they carried out attacks there? They've never targeted high profile buildings, crowded places. They've never tried to kill civilians in large numbers. They could have done it. They haven't done it. Why? Because they are insurgents. Their goals are different. Their agenda is different. Terrorists, their goals and agendas are different. Can you see the difference? The effectiveness of a terror attack lies not just in the attack, but in the ability to push the government to overreact. Governments will overreact only when there is public pressure, media pressure, and opposition pressure. Clear? This is a feature of terrorism. As I told you, why do you think Al Qaeda went to the extent of sending so many terrorists to the US? They infiltrated US, stayed there for a long time. They joined flying schools, learned how to fly a plane, hijacked 4 commercial airlines. It's not a joke. And flew them like missiles into key buildings. World Trade Center, the very symbol of American capitalism, at the very heart of New York. The Pentagon, the headquarters of US Department of Defense. The 4th plane was probably headed to Washington. Maybe White House or US Capitol was the target. Fortunately, the passengers who got to know about the terrorist plan, they brought down the plane in an open field, thus preventing another tragedy in Washington. Why did Al Qaeda go to that extent? Why not simply set off some bombs or go on a shooting attack, which is more easier to carry out? Why plan so extensively, put in that kind of effort, take that kind of risk? Because terrorists want a sophisticated, horrific attack which will shock our senses. Something unprecedented, unimaginable. Right? We humans, our psychology is like that. You can't help it. Our attention is drawn to new things. Our attention is drawn to horrific things. So we are captivated. Right? Today, in today's world, there is 24/7 live footage, right, of every attack beamed in every television. Now with internet and social media, the incidents are beamed live. Immediately your attention shifts towards these incidents. That is exactly what the terrorists want. They want to grab your attention. They want you to overreact. So they do this by striking mindlessly, by planning horrific attacks, killing as many people as possible. They'll kill soldiers, they'll kill civilians as well. But they're not directly challenging the government. Al Qaeda has never said, we'll throw out US government and we'll capture US for ourselves. Al Qaeda has never said that. That's not their goal. That's what makes Al Qaeda a terrorist group. Al Qaeda's agenda is different. It's fighting for radical fundamentalism and it blames all Western countries for all the problems. That's why it attacks Western countries. It's fighting for a political cause. These groups, terror groups, they want to highlight their political agenda by striking fear in your mind. Understood? That's why I gave the 2 examples. A Lashkar attack in Mumbai, a small incident, a major Naxal attack in the remote forests. Where does our attention go? Maybe you are UPSC aspirants, we are different. We will focus on both, right? But media is not like that. Common people, the Aam Aadmi is not like that. Their attention will be on the incident in Mumbai. Nobody would have even heard about the incident in Chhattisgarh. So this is the core difference between terrorism and insurgency. Terror attacks are designed to grab attention and to immediately grab eyeballs. That's why the attacks are sophisticated, a lot of planning is involved. They go behind high profile targets. Understood? This is where the effectiveness of terrorism lies. Because when governments overreact, the terrorist purpose is served, their agenda is served. Hamas pushed Israel to overreact. Now see what's happening to Israel. It's draining its wealth, risking its soldiers, killing civilians. It's getting accused of genocide, human rights violations. The world sympathy has shifted towards the Palestinian cause, and Palestinian issue is at the forefront. Israel is actually on the back foot. Despite the war dragging, Israel is pushed on the back foot. It might corner Hamas, it might someday eliminate Hamas, you never know, but still the narrative has shifted. Hamas wanted that. It doesn't care about the lives lost. Anyways, Palestinians had no life thanks to what Israel had done. So Hamas wanted Palestinian issue to come up at the forefront, to capture global spotlight. That's exactly what has happened. So terror groups, they do this. This is how they plan. This is how they strategize. This is their agenda. They want to bring the agenda they're fighting for to the forefront. Is that clear? You take Pulwama attacks. I'll give you another example. Pulwama attacks by Jaish-e-Mohammed. It dragged India to retaliate against Pakistan, right? And the issue which props up is the Kashmir issue. That's what Jaish wants. That's what Lashkar wants. They want Kashmir issue to be at the forefront, to be in the spotlight all the time. That's what Pakistan wants. It wants international attention on Kashmir. It wants to drag this to the international level and weaken India's position. That's why it uses terrorism. It uses terror groups like Lashkar and Jaish to carry out these strikes. The intention is to draw attention and push for an overreaction. Is that clear? I'll provide another argument as well. You take 9/11 attacks and Mumbai attacks. These two incidents changed the world. The overreaction was so much that it changed the world forever. After 9/11 attacks, US went into an overdrive. To target Al-Qaeda, it went to war in Afghanistan, declared a war against Taliban itself, which controlled Afghanistan. It invaded Afghanistan and got locked in a 2-decade war. The US drained trillions of dollars, lost 4,000 soldiers, which was more than the casualties in 9/11 attacks. This was the price US paid for its overreaction. The same money, the same resources could have built their economy. Right? Take India as well. After Mumbai attacks, the pressure was so much that our security weaknesses had been exposed. Our maritime coastal security was weak. India has spent billions of dollars after Mumbai attacks to strengthen our security. It is needed, correct, to strengthen our intelligence apparatus, to strengthen our security framework. We have to spend. But imagine if the incident didn't happen, the same resources, the same money could be used for economic, social purposes, for welfare, for development. This is also the goal of terrorists, to drain the target, to drain the country, their resources, their wealth, distract them, make them focus only on these issues, on the disputes, on the security aspects, make them overspend. This will eventually drain the country. This is destabilizing the country. Is that clear? So terrorism is designed for that. Usually, as I told you, terrorists are not seeking territorial control. This is also a feature of terrorism. A pure terrorist outfit, they don't want territorial control. Again, the same examples. Lashkar, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Al-Qaeda, they have never said we'll capture Kashmir, we will capture India. No, they've never said that. They're saying we'll liberate Kashmir, we'll help in the liberation of Kashmir. That's why we are targeting India. One exception here is Islamic State. ISIS is an exception. ISIS is an exception because it wanted territorial control to set up the so-called caliphate, to set up an Islamic State. So ISIS is an exception. All right. So what I'm discussing is a general theory. There can be some exceptions. Like Hamas, obviously, let's say, hypothetically, if it manages to liberate Palestine someday, Hamas would love to govern Palestine. It would love to capture the territory and form the state. So that way, Hamas is different again. It's an exception. ISIS is a clear exception. It is a terrorist group engaged in brutal, mindless violence, but it only cares about religious fundamentalism. It doesn't care about geopolitics. It's not fighting as a proxy for any government or any country. It's only interested in creating a caliphate, and it wanted territorial control. In fact, when ISIS rose to prominence in 2014, it captured a very large territory in Iraq and Syria, a territory as large as Great Britain. Such a large extent of territory was captured by ISIS in 2014 in Iraq and Syria. That's how they declared the formation of a so-called Islamic Caliphate. So ISIS is an exception. Despite being a terrorist organization, despite engaging in mindless, brutal violence, it wanted territorial control. That was mainly for religious fundamentalist reasons, nothing else. So ISIS is an exception. But usually a terrorist group does not attempt to have territorial control because it doesn't want to form future state or government. It's not directly challenging the state. Clear? Then the last point. Terror groups, they have no limitations, no constraints. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about international laws and conventions. They don't care about any moral, ethical values. They will target civilians as well. They'll kill women and children and old people as well. They'll target security forces as well. They will hire child soldiers. They'll put a weapon in the hands of a child. They don't care about it. Right? They will use suicide bombers. They will recruit women as well, if required. They don't have any constraints, any restrictions. This is a feature of terrorism. Look at ISIS. ISIS carried out beheadings on camera. That's how horrific it was. They don't care about the public image. They don't care about what others think of the group. They want others to fear the group because they want attention. Insurgents are not like that. Insurgents are different in every aspect. I'll show you that. I'll discuss that. Now that you understood what are the features of a terrorist group, let's compare this with an insurgent group. Let us see how they are slightly different. One, insurgency is an organized rebellion against the state. They are directly challenging the state, as we studied. They are taking up extremism, violent extremism, to remove the state, meaning they are directly challenging the state. There is a direct challenge. They are openly saying that we will throw the state out and capture state power, and we will form the future state. We will form the future government. Just like the Maoists, the communists in China did. They threw out Republic of China, captured the state, and Communist Party formed the Chinese state and became the PRC. Naxals in India, their goal is to throw the Indian state out, capture the Indian state. Northeast insurgents, separatist groups in Kashmir, few local separatist groups in Kashmir, which were fighting for independence, right? Initially, their goal also was to liberate those areas from India and form the future state. So those are insurgent movements. They have an aim for territorial control. They want territorial control. So usually insurgencies can also be seen as separatist movements like ULFA, NSCN, JKLF in Kashmir. These were separatist groups. They wanted to liberate these conflict areas from India, achieve independence, and form the future government. So they were not only challenging the Indian state, targeting the Indian state directly, but they wanted territorial control as well. Terrorists don't usually seek territorial control, except for ISIS. So the political aims are very clear in case of insurgency. Like Naxals, like Taliban, like Northeast insurgents. They have a clear-cut political aim, which is to remove the existing government and form the future government. Another feature of insurgency is that they are very well structured. They are very well organized. Again, I want you to remember yesterday's discussion. I told you yesterday that under the Maoist doctrine, Mao Zedong advised the Maoists to build an organizational structure, to have a hierarchy, to assign different roles, to replicate government machinery, to mirror the government functioning. Why? Because tomorrow, if they succeed in their goal, they should have the support of the locals. The locals should believe, they should have faith that this organization can form the government and run the administration. This is a feature of insurgency. They work in an organized manner. They pursue their long-term goals. They are ready for a protracted war. That's why insurgencies are more difficult to tackle. It takes more time to end insurgent movements because they're ideologically prepared for a prolonged conflict. They are more structured, organized compared to your terrorist groups. Is that clear? In the future, if they manage to win the war and throw the state out and form the future state, they would want recognition. They would want legitimacy. Right? This will not happen without local support. So they have to build that faith in the locals who are supporting them that yes, this organization has the ability to govern. That is why they are well structured, well organized. They have clear hierarchies. In CPI Maoist, there is a separate political committee, a standing bureau, right? There is a separate armed organization, separate wing for propaganda, separate wing for finances, separate wing for intelligence. They are replicating the government machinery. If you look at Northeast insurgent groups, they even have a so-called prime minister, defense minister, external affairs minister, so-called army chief. They themselves give those ranks because they're replicating, mirroring the government, showing the support base, showing the local people who support them that they have the ability to form a future government. It's very important for them. Terrorists don't do that. They're not so well structured or well organized. They don't care about the ranks. A terror group is headed by a few commanders, but you don't find such hierarchy and a government-like organizational structure. You don't find that in a terror group. Terror groups are loosely built. There are few commanders who head the groups, but they're not as well structured and hierarchically organized as a insurgent outfit. Understood? And in the future, as they are seeking recognition and legitimacy, they are worried about their image. They are concerned about their image. As I told you, terrorists don't care about this. They want to be more brutal. They want to draw more attention. They want others to fear them. But insurgents are not like that. If they commit brutal violence, tomorrow who will support them? Who will recognize them? If they kill civilians, women and children, locals themselves will not support them. Globally, even if they capture power and form the state, who will give them recognition? Nobody will deal with them. Taliban is the perfect example here. You know, Taliban, when it captured power in 96, it was very brutal. Even though it was a political extremist insurgent group, it was acting very brutally. It enforced the strict Sharia. It targeted religious minorities. It targeted Hindus, Buddhists, Sikhs, even Muslims who wouldn't abide by Taliban's dictates. They would be targeted. So minorities were targeted, religious and ethnic minorities. Women were targeted. Gender rights were violated. Right? The rights were snatched away from women. They couldn't go to schools. They couldn't study. They couldn't work. They couldn't step out of the house. Right? They couldn't travel. They couldn't drive. Everything was prohibited. So Taliban built a notorious image. So nobody gave recognition to Taliban. No major government gave Taliban recognition back then. So this time, when they came back to power in 2021, when they captured power again, this time Taliban was a little smarter. They realized that last time they were so brutal that no one gave them recognition and everyone saw them as a terrorist group. What purpose will it serve if you capture power and nobody is ready to work with you? Nobody is ready to recognize you. This time the Taliban has behaved slightly in a different manner. I'm not saying they have reformed, they have become moderate. No, they are at least pretending to be moderate. They are looking for recognition. They are craving legitimacy right now because all the Afghan money which was there abroad is frozen. There are sanctions on Taliban. No government is recognizing them. Nobody is trading with them. What will Taliban do with the power? It's useless. So Taliban is trying to show it's a reformed organization. It's trying to show it's a little more moderate. So even now it is violating human rights. It has targeted minorities, women, but it's doing it in a more subtle manner, meaning it has put some constraints on itself. It is trying to adhere to some international norms, trying to pretend as if it has constraints, as if it follows some ethics and values and some international principles. I'll tell you something very ironic and hilarious as well. When Russia attacked Ukraine, when the Russia-Ukraine war broke out, by then Taliban had captured power in Afghanistan. Taliban had formed an interim government. Taliban issued a press statement. And you know what Taliban was saying in the press statement? It was asking Russia and Ukraine to not use violence. That violence is not good for the world. Peace and stability is needed. Moderation, talks, negotiations are needed. This was coming from Taliban, which itself has used brutal violence, mindless violence. Why was Taliban doing this? It's not that Taliban had changed, it had become a good organization. No, they were pretending. They were pretending to show they have constraints, that they are following certain principles. They were advising Russia, Ukraine to not use violence when they themselves are a brutal organization. So this is the feature of insurgent groups. As they crave recognition, legitimacy, right? They try to pretend that they have some constraints. Naxals, the same with them. Northeast insurgents, they don't go for mindless violence. That's why they don't attack crowded places, cities. They mainly attack government forces, which according to them is a legitimate target. Naxals largely stay away from attacking civilians, right? They don't take up brutal acts, especially against women, children, old people, because they know that will bring a bad name, a bad image for them. Forget recognition from outside. Locals will not support them if they become brutal. That is why insurgents pretend to have some constraints on them. I'm not saying insurgents are better than terrorists. No, they are not. Insurgency is also equally worse. It is only slightly better than terrorism. They are pretending because they want to show the world that tomorrow, if they form the state and the government, if others give recognition, they will reform, they will be moderate. That is why they are doing it. That is why they accept certain constraints and restrictions, which is not done by terrorists. Terrorists don't care about it. They want to be brutal. That is how they can capture attention. This is the core difference between a terrorist group and an insurgent militant organization. Is that clear? Also, insurgents usually use guerrilla warfare tactics. They hide in jungles. They mount surprise ambush attacks, as you see in the case of Naxals, LTT, Northeast insurgents. Terrorists usually don't follow guerrilla warfare tactics. They mainly target high-profile targets. Is that clear? Insurgents communicate with their surrounding as well, because they have to spread their ideology, spread their propaganda. They want mass support. To get mass support, they engage in a lot of propaganda. They communicate with the local people, with the media. Usually terrorists don't do this. Terrorists just want few radical members to fight for their cause. They will only radicalize few elements and indoctrinate them. They don't care about communicating with the masses, with the media. They don't care about it because that is not their agenda. But since insurgents want mass support, as we studied, Mao Zedong said that Maoist movement should be a mass movement backed by millions of people, backed by the masses, the farmers, peasants, tribal communities. To get that kind of support, you have to communicate. You have to spread your ideology, spread your propaganda. So insurgents are more interested in that. Terrorists don't care about it. They only want few hundred terrorists. That's it. They will radicalize a few youth, recruit them. That's enough for their operations. Insurgents believe in a mass movement, a mass rebellion, so they communicate. This is also another important feature. Now, why did I spend so much time in highlighting the differences? It's because there can be a mains question. UPSC has not asked something like this. It can be asked. UPSC can ask you to differentiate between terrorism and insurgency. Without knowing this concept, you cannot write an answer to this. So kindly remember these points that I have discussed, the examples I have given you, and you can present this answer beautifully in 5 or 6 points. I have given a summary as well here, drawing a direct comparison, like how insurgents target only combatants. They mainly target soldiers and security forces. They usually spare civilians, non-combatants. Terrorists don't care about it. They'll target both. They'll target soldiers, the state forces, they'll target civilians as well. They want more killings as much as possible. Insurgents are little careful. They try to avoid civilian casualties. Insurgents want territorial control. They want to form liberated areas. They want to form the future government. Terrorists don't care about territorial control, except for ISIS. Generally, terror groups, they don't seek territorial control. Insurgents try to replicate government machinery. They try to mirror the organizational structure, hierarchical model of the state. Terrorists don't do it. They don't care about it. They don't want to form the future government, right? They just want to highlight their political cause by striking fear. Whereas insurgents want to capture power and form the future state. That's why they try to mirror the government structure. Next, last point. Insurgents work quite openly. Like you know where Naxals are operating. You can tell with confidence that Naxals are not operating in Gujarat. Naxals are not operating in Delhi, in Bangalore. I can clearly tell that Naxals are here. These are the districts, these are the states. Why? They are operating visibly, openly. That is the only way in which you can challenge the state. Only if you openly challenge the state, only then you can fight. If they hide, right, then they can't really challenge the state power. So they are in a more open confrontation with the state. Whereas terrorists operate secretly. You don't know where Lashkar terrorists are. They could be in Pakistan, they could be in Kashmir, they could be in Dubai, they could be in Karnataka, anywhere. You don't know. Why? Because they operate covertly, secretly. They don't let their presence be felt. They only let their attacks speak for them. Got it? But insurgents openly declare their presence. That this is where we operate. This is our stronghold. We will openly challenge the forces. We'll target the forces. Why? Because they want to liberate the area, throw the state and capture state power. Terrorists, they don't do that. They work secretly. Got it? So these are some essential differences. I've discussed other points as well, and I've given a summary. So based on this, build an answer. Keep an answer ready. What if there is an essay topic on terrorism and insurgency? You have to draw the distinction. So keep few points ready. Write a one-page answer for this based on these points. Keep it ready so you don't have to prepare for this again. So based on the question, you can immediately add those points and make your answer better. Got it? So this completes my discussion on terrorism and insurgency. I think now we can take the lunch break. It's almost 1 p.m. So let's take a 1 hour lunch break. Let's come back at 2 p.m. So after lunch, I will start with Khalistan and Jammu and Kashmir. Before that, there is one small topic left here, which is insurrection. It will take maybe 10 minutes. We'll finish insurrection, which is also a type of extremism, a different type of extremism. We'll complete this, and In the afternoon and evening session, we will discuss Khalistan, Kashmir, how India is dealing with terrorism. That's the last part of the discussion. So just give me 2 minutes. I'll see if there are any doubts, any questions, and after that, we can go for the lunch break. Aditya is asking, sir, then why don't we call ISIS an insurgent organization? See, ISIS is a terrorist group. We don't call it an insurgent group because ISIS is brutal. It is mindlessly killing people. It will target security forces. It will target civilians, right? It will behead people. It will execute major attacks. Only difference is that ISIS wants territorial control. Apart from that, nothing about ISIS refers to an insurgency. It's a brutal terrorist organization. Its intention is to strike fear, target people of every other faith, even Muslims who don't abide by its wrong ideology. It wants to capture territory. That is the only difference. Apart from that, ISIS is a terrorist organization because it's brutal. It engages in mindless violence. Ketan is asking, insurgency depends on individual, terror over a group. No. Whether you're an individual or a group, defining insurgency, terrorism will remain the same. Like whatever I told you, like I told you this as an individual. Even an institution will tell you the same. Let's say you go to a think tank. Think tanks will also give you the same differences between terrorism and insurgency. It will not change with individuals or groups. It's the same. Ghulam Mustafa is asking, sir, answer should be written in point format or difference format. For this question, where difference comparison is asked, it's better you make it a comparison. Draw a table. You can highlight features of terrorism, features of insurgency, point 1, point 2, point 3. That's a better format. So it depends on the question. In other questions, point-wise paragraph format is better, right? So you can't have a set format. Depending on the question, what the question is asking, you decide what format you will use. For a question asking for differences comparison, yes, table-like format where you draw the comparison is better. But others, paragraph format or point-wise format will be better. Hemlata is asking how to combat insurgency. We discussed yesterday. If you attended yesterday's class, I told you how we have countered Naxalism. That is an example. Next, Northeast insurgency, we'll discuss in the next weekend. There you will again understand how you can counter insurgency. We'll come to it again. But we already covered the discussion. We'll do it again under Northeast insurgency. Aditya is asking, then what do we mean by militant organization? Militant is again a very neutral term used by neutral institutions. They refer to terrorists and insurgents as militants sometimes because they don't want to assign labels, as this is very subjective sometimes. It's complicated. It's very sensitive issue as well. So media outlets, usually they are very careful. They don't call anyone terrorists or insurgents. They take a neutral stand. They call them militants. Militant or militancy is a more neutral, soft sounding word compared to insurgency or terrorism. Is that clear? But militancy is more closely aligned with insurgency. The meaning of militancy is more closely aligned with insurgency. Kanchana is asking why terrorists want to instill fear. What do they get by instilling fear? I just explained you. By instilling fear, they're drawing attention to their cause. When you're scared about a terror group, when you're horrified by a terror attack, that is when you pay attention to the issue. Now, you honestly tell me, how many of you had heard about Hamas before 7th October? How many of you knew the details of Israel-Palestine conflict before 7th October? Today, Hamas is a household name. Around the world, everybody knows Hamas right now. Why? They struck fear. They horrified the world with their attack. What did they achieve by doing that? They brought the Palestinian issue to the forefront. Now everybody knows what is Hamas, where is Gaza, what is Palestinian issue. That is terrorism for you. That is what they get by striking fear. All right. Guys, these are the questions. Let's go for the lunch break. 1 hour. It's already 1:05. Okay, let's meet at 2:05. I don't want to put you under too much stress. You need 60 minutes break. Let's meet at 2:05. We'll talk about insurrection, 5-10 minutes, and then Khalistan and Jammu and Kashmir. So don't miss the class. Don't drop out. I know it's a Sunday, but please come back. There are important topics we'll cover later. So I'll see you in 1 hour.